LoveLore Library. Chapter 244. Don't ask for my name or citizen number. I'm not that stupid, even though writing this letter is stupid in itself. I also don't want to use any evidence to prove that I'm an engineer from the Nutshell Engineering Department, because this is an open letter written by me alone. Those who believe will believe, but those who don't can take it as a joke. The reason for writing this open letter is very simple. It's to explain. We know that the Academy of Sciences has already completed the development of the new MX mecha. At this time, the Nutshell company still wants to develop another mecha. Many people won't understand, thinking that this repetition is a waste of the Federation's resources, but I want to remind you of one thing. A mecha is not a clay figurine, it's not something a 3-year-old child can casually rub on the beach to make. The clumsy clay figurine may have the innocent beauty of a child, but it definitely can't help the Federal Army gain too much in the battle against the Empire. This most sophisticated and complex humanoid machine needs a long time to develop. The Nutshell Company had the initial intention of developing the MX mech 30 years ago. After a long period of preparation work, the project was officially established 12 years ago. Countless experts, scholars, and technicians put in their youth and sweat to develop the first-generation prototype last autumn. And we know, you also know, that the Federal Academy of Science has never had a similar plan. They just suddenly started this year, so in terms of first come first serve, the one wasting the Federation's resources should be the Federal Academy of Science, not the Nutshell Company. What I don't understand even more is that after the Federal Academy of Science started the development of the new MX mecha, it only took a few short months to achieve success. How did they do it? We know that the Federal Academy of Science gathered the best scientists in the Federation, but I still don't believe that they have the technical ability, because if they did, the Federation's army would have already stepped on the soil of the Empire's capital. I'll repeat again, developing a mecha is not like making clay figurines, but the Academy of Sciences used the speed of making clay figurines to make it. Respect. Of course I respect it. Just like the cartoon on the Federation's children's channel, to be able to have this kind of speed, it's really amazing. I'm not accusing the Federal Academy of Science of plagiarism. Although everyone knows that the cartoon was plagiarizing, I'm just using a possibly inappropriate example. Especially when the target of this accusation is the Federal Academy of Science, which is deeply respected by all of us, we have to be more careful. Although there are rumors in the academic community, our Dean Lin's record is not as pure and clean as everyone thinks. Because it's related to the Federation's absolute technical secrets, I can't say some details, but I want to remind everyone of one name, Professor Shen Yulin. If anyone is interested, you can research this name. Also, I want to remind everyone that the student who owns all of Professor Shen's academic legacy is one of the technical supervisors of our Nutshell Engineering Department. Just a few months ago, this technical supervisor was under pressure from certain parties and was locked up in the district attorney's office. Fortunately, he has been released now. Whether or not the Shell Motor Company should have developed the MX mecha, now that it has been developed successfully, the next step is to see whether the Federation government will choose the standards of the Federal Academy of Science or the standards of the Nutshell Company. From the perspective of a professional, I think this is a very simple proposition. I know that this open letter by one person will cause a lot of discussion, but I think, as an engineer of the Shell Motor Company, the conscience of a technical person and the principles of being a human being make me stand up and say these words. I don't want to see people who do things being criticized, while those who only know how to take the fruits of others' labor being made into statues and respected by others. There was a lot of content in the open letter, but it was basically just the tone of the person involved, using the tone of a tabloid to describe the so-called privacy of the Federation's academic community. This was a classic literary format. Anyone who was clear-headed would definitely feel that there were a lot of problems in this open letter. It was just that the things mentioned in this open letter were too explosive, so no one thought about the deeper problems. The open letter of this engineer had a total of 3,700 words. Not a single word was used to accuse the Federal Academy of Science of plagiarism, but the 3,000 words were actually all about this one problem. Anyone who read this open letter would know what this person wanted to say. The Federal Academy of Science was the most respected academic institution in the Federation, and Dean Lin was the leader of the academic community who was highly respected by the people. How could such an institution and scholar plagiarize? A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. The entire sky of the planet was suddenly filled with all kinds of posts. A portion of people directly vented their dissatisfaction with life in the Federation. Without even thinking, they began to use a fierce tone to scold the Federal Academy of Science for being shameless. A portion of the public who thought they were calm began to weigh their words and express their opinions. They thought that this matter was completely ridiculous. Most of these people thought that the engineer who published the open letter was not a staff member of the Nutshell Engineering Department at all, but was just a despicable person who wanted to see the world in chaos. The real black-bellied conspiracy theorists began to harshly criticize the engineer. They believed that this was nothing more than a game between the political forces of the upper echelons of the Federation, and that the Nutshell Mobility Company had used despicable means to obtain a huge order from the government. There were even more daring conspiracy theorists who connected it to the network spies that the Empire had bribed. The silent majority, on the other hand, began to ponder the questions raised in the open letter. Doubts began to grow in their hearts. If Nutshell Corporation had begun the development of the MX Mecha more than a decade ago, why would the Federation's Academy of Sciences intervene halfway through? Moreover, who could explain the problems pointed out by the engineers? On the same night, the silent majority began to use the relatively free environment of the Federation's network to search for some information, especially regarding the gradually forgotten Professor Shen Yulin. At 1:00 in the morning, someone found an article from many years ago in an academic journal. The article used an obscure tone to point out that the academic results used by Professor Shen Yulin for the Federal Academy of Science to apply for the Nebula Award were mostly completed by Professor Shen Yulin as early as 3 years ago. Professor Lin Yuanhu was the current leader of the academic community in the Federation, the head of the Federation's Academy of Science. When he applied for the Nebula Award, he was already a famous young professor in the Federation and had an extremely high reputation. Immediately after, someone found out that the academic journal that dared to publish the article about Professor Lin Yuanhu's plagiarism had its funding and authority revoked by the Federation's academic committee. In the end, the journal ended up closing its doors. At this point, the once glorious name of Shen Yulin, the former Nebula Award winner, once again entered the public eye. The public found out on the internet that after that incident, Professor Shen left the Federal Academy of Science and entered the Shell Motor Corporation Research Institute. He disappeared from the academic community for more than 10 years. As for what he did after that, no one could find out. Everything left a trace. Lin Yuanhu probably didn't expect that the academic community of the Federation, which was under his control, would no longer dare to oppose him. But on the Federation's public network, the ancient information was still preserved. At 3:30 in the morning, someone finally found out about the incident at the Shell Motor Corporation Research Institute half a year ago. Not long after Professor Shen Yulin's death, his laboratory had been sealed up, and that assistant researcher who had accompanied him at the end had been arrested. Now, his whereabouts were unknown. One problem after another was dug up by the public. Although it was just bits and pieces of evidence, coupled with their enthusiasm and imagination, a story of a top student suppressing his dissidence and shamelessly stealing the fruits of another's research had already been formed. The angry people became angrier and angrier, and the silent people also began to publish long articles full of logical reasoning. Even those bitter and mean conspiracy theorists, after a few hours of silence, began to jump out again. Only this time, their target was already the Federal Academy of Science, and even the Federation government. The first 40 pages of Planet Sky's discussion section were all discussing this matter. At this time, no one was concerned about whether the Federation's new MX Mecha standard was based on the Federal Academy of Science or Nutshell's latest standard. Everyone was only guessing whether plagiarism really existed. The media caught wind of the news, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, a reporter from the Federation's most widely circulated serious magazine, Galaxy, called the number of the Federal Academy of Sciences press officer. Over the phone, the reporter told the other party about what had happened on the internet that night, and asked if the other party had anything to say in response. The internet is free, freedom is lawless, and lawlessness is untrustworthy. As the press officer of the Federation's highest academic institution, do you think I need to give any response to these unreasonable comments? The Federal Academy of Sciences press officer laughed loudly on the other end of the phone. I just want to tell you in private. Regarding this kind of shameless slander against the Federal Academy of Science and Dean Lin, we will reserve the right to sue the rumormonger. After the reporter hung up, he shook his head. He thought to himself, you're still picking up the phone at 5 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, you haven't slept yet. It looks like you must have been disturbed by the news of the Shell Motor Company's successful research and the rumors of plagiarism on the internet. You can still laugh so heartily. It was unknown whether this reporter did not follow the principle of private conversation, or whether some busybody had imitated the tone of this press officer, but in any case, on the internet's news bulletin board, a post similar to the content of this conversation appeared once again. Behind it, there were countless replies from the public. I'm so scared, my previous comments were caused by someone hacking my account. I do not bear any legal responsibility, I live in Bermuda. If you have the ability, cross the universe to hunt me down. The next day, it was also raining in the capital special district. Professor Shin was holding an umbrella. Just as he was about to walk through the gates of the first military academy, he was surrounded by countless reporters who came out of nowhere. He looked at the umbrellas, cameras, and camcorders all around him and was slightly taken aback. He did not understand what had happened. He slept extremely early every night, so naturally, he did not know what had happened at Shell Motor Company or what had happened on the internet. After being informed of the news on the internet by the reporters, Professor Shin was silent for a long time before he raised his head. A faint smile hung on his face as he said, "It's not convenient for me to say anything." At this moment, he knew that Sulu, his father's favorite student before his death, had finally begun to seek something for his father in the underworld. His emotions were calm, but there was a trace of comfort in them. Professor Shin, what exactly was the problem between Professor Shin and Dean Lin back then? It said that they were colleagues in the same laboratory back then. Professor Shin, is the sealing of Professor Shin's laboratory related to the development of the MX Mecha this time? There are rumors on the internet that Professor Shin's academic legacy is now owned by an assistant researcher. As the only heir to Professor Shin's legacy, do you have any comments on this? Professor Shin had not answered any of the reporter's questions, but when he heard these words, he stopped in his tracks. He turned his head and said seriously, "This sentence is true. According to the agreement between the Federation and the government, the final 10 years of my father's research results belong to my father. The Federation only has the right to use them, and this right has now been transferred to the hands of my father's student. The transfer process was witnessed by my lawyer and myself. If necessary, I am willing to repeat the above explanation again." The reporter's tiny recording pens faithfully recorded these few sentences. Another reporter asked anxiously, regarding Dean Lin's plagiarism of Professor Shin Yulin's academic achievements, as well as the Federal Academy of Sciences' possible plagiarism of the Shell Motor Company's design, "Can you say a few words?" Professor Shin was silent for a long time, then he shook his head and said, "I have no evidence." After this sentence, Professor Shin walked towards the campus in the autumn rain. His pace was calm. He was just like his father. Although he was angry at the injustice, he was more willing to devote his time and energy to meaningful research than to live a sad life like a woman. A rigorous scholar would not express any opinions without evidence. The ID shell engineer had become a celebrity on the Federation's network, but no matter how hard they searched, they could not find the owner behind this ID. The Federal Academy of Science naturally did not make any comments on this matter, and the reporters who rushed to the Harbor City Industrial Park were also unable to interview any of the Shell Motor Company's employees. However, they finally received confirmation from the Shell Motor Company's news department that the Shell Motor Company had indeed successfully developed the new MX mecha. It passed the preliminary inspection by the Department of Defense and was temporarily named Little White Flower. There was no grand press conference. It was as if the weather was good to announce this important news. All the reporters felt a little uncomfortable. They did not understand why the Shell Motor Company was so low-key. Supervisor Jose walked into the warehouse and said to Sulu, who was working hard at the workbench, "Did you go online last night?" Sulu smiled. Mr. Jose did not say anything else. He only sighed and said, "The president's office called the CEO's office." Apparently, the CEO scolded the CEO, and then the CEO scolded me. Actually, what I want to say is that we have already done what we should have done. I believe that our research on mecha is more solid than the Federal Academy of Science. As long as we fight for it, the Federation's mecha standards in the future will definitely use us. Why do we have to cause trouble at this time? The Purple Sea from the Academy of Science should have a higher output than us, Shangqiu replied. But this is not the main point. I have always had my doubts about its stability. After saying this, Shangqiu glanced at Sulu. In fact, everyone present was well aware that the person who had sent out the message last night must be present. The Shell Motor Company had developed the MX a little later than the Academy of Science. No matter how grand a press conference they held, it would not be able to achieve the sensational effect that the Academy of Science had. This kind of bottom-up, from the internet to the real world, could instead achieve good results. Sulu thought to himself that just getting the standards was not enough. Mr. Jose looked calmly at Sulu. He knew what he was thinking. This matter concerned Professor Shin's reputation. This genius technician would definitely not back down. There is no evidence. Mr. Jose was silent for a moment before saying, "No matter how much the people talk about it, there is no evidence. After a while, it will die down." "I'm thinking of a way to let the evidence grow on its own," said Sulu with his head lowered. Overnight, the entire Federation knew that the Shell Motor Company had also successfully developed the new MX mecha. As for what standards the Federation should use, heated discussions began in the various official residencies in the capital, in the offices of the Federation Management Committee, and in the staff meetings of the various military regions. Also overnight, on Star Sky, including the Federation's public network, any discussion of the new mecha was swept clean. The Federation government, on the grounds of protecting the secret of the new mecha, was forgiven by the majority of the public. After all, this was not a discussion about which restaurant's food was better. But because of this, the accusations of plagiarism involving Dean Lin Yuanhu were also strictly controlled under this reason. After a burst of autumn rain and a burst of cold, a black car slowly stopped in front of the hotel beside the Charter Square in the capital special district. After Li Xiuzhu got off the car, he raised the collar of his windbreaker, covering his handsome and calm face, and walked into the hotel. Using the special VIP elevator to reach the top floor, he pushed open the heavy door. Secretary Luo stood up to welcome him. Li Xiuzhu ignored him and hung his windbreaker on a hanger. He smiled slightly and said, "Are you confident tomorrow? We have already obtained the technical specifications of the Shell Motor Company. They are completely at a disadvantage." "There will be no problems in tomorrow's meeting," said Secretary Luo softly. "Dean Lin will come after the meeting." "Is the Dean in a good mood?" Li Xiuzhu tried his best to keep his smile from showing any hint of schadenfreude. He walked to the window and looked at the brightly colored presidential residence in the distance. As long as the standards of the Academy of Sciences were used in tomorrow's meeting, what would those discussions count for? Chapter 245. That night, Li Xiuzhu invited Dean Lin for dinner. At the table, the two of them talked about the recent battle of mecha standards in the Federation. The data from the Federal Academy of Science and the Shell Motor Company had already been handed over to the government. As for who the government would choose in the end, it was still a long process of struggle. However, from Dean Lin's side, Li Xiuzhu had obtained some inside information and was relieved. As long as the purple CMX from the Academy of Science could completely suppress the little white flower from the engineering department in terms of technical specifications, it would be much more natural for him to take advantage of the situation and do some tricks outside the decision-making level. Generation after generation of aristocratic children appeared in the Federation, but there weren't many who could truly lead the society for a time. Li Xiuzhu was the first in line to inherit the Li family, but this was the first time he had appeared on behalf of the family alone. He had gone deep into the political circle to stir up trouble. This matter involved the presidential election and his own future, so he naturally couldn't allow his performance this time to fade into the crowd or even become a laughingstock. Today, the Federal Academy of Science had already been tied to the election war chariot of the two candidates. Even if Li Xiuzhu had too many opinions about Lin Yuanhu, it wasn't convenient for him to show them now. After all, if the Academy of Science lost the standards battle, the plagiarism controversy wouldn't be able to calm down even if it wanted to. This would also have a responsible impact on the presidential election. As a nephew, he wouldn't be so presumptuous as to show a black face to the leader of the Federation's academic community at the dinner table, but he really didn't have much interest in catering to the other party. Lin Yuanhu still had that noble and respectable expression on his face, as if he wasn't affected by the rumors accusing him of plagiarism among the people. Speaking of which, it made sense. After sitting in the position of the head of the Federal Academy of Science for so many years, his tenure was much longer than that of the president's. This kind of important figure would only smile slightly towards the discussions of the ordinary people and not care at all. After a dinner that wasn't very tasty ended, Dean Lin received the promise of continued support from Li Xiuzhu, and Li Xiuzhu also received the assurance that there wouldn't be any problems with the Academy of Science. They didn't taste much of the food, but both parties were quite satisfied with this interaction. Li Xiuzhu politely sent Lin Yuanhu out of the restaurant and walked toward the car outside the hotel's revolving door. He was like a real nephew showing respect. The old man and the young man were escorted by their secretaries and subordinates. When they were about to leave the hotel, they saw 6 or 7 people coming in from outside. Those people were young and wore very ordinary clothes. However, in the gloomy autumn day, they gave people a sense of calmness and experience. This high-class hotel was filled with high officials and nobles. With so many people coming and going, it was very lively. It was very normal to meet someone at the entrance of the hotel. Li Xiuzhu's footsteps slowed down a bit. At the same time, he noticed a man with small eyes in the group. He looked a little familiar. Secretary Lu's eyes flashed with a strange color. He leaned close to Li Xiuzhu's ear and whispered, "They are from the Nutshell Engineering Department. The small-eyed man in the middle is Su Lo." Li Xiuzhu's eyebrows jumped. He was a bit surprised, but he immediately remembered that the Federation was in the middle of reviewing the standards. The Nutshell Engineering Department would definitely send a technician over. He turned around and glanced at Su Lo imperceptibly. He also noticed a woman with an impressive figure and a pair of glasses beside Su Lo. He smiled and said softly, "The people from the Nutshell Engineering Department this time seem to be quite young." "Shang Qiu, the key person in the twin-engine technology," Secretary Lu said softly. Li Xiuzhu's eyes were filled with surprise. He was just admiring the female engineer's temperament and impressive curves. He didn't expect this woman to be such an important person. Say hello to your father for me. Lin Yuanhu walked to the side of the car and said lightly, at the same time, tell Senator Macklin that the small fries in the Federation are nothing to be afraid of. Just like the hills under the moon, why should we be afraid of the wind coming from all directions? Li Xiuzhu smiled slightly and replied softly. However, he didn't tell the other that the brat that the Federal Academy of Science hated the most was right behind them right now. He lowered his body and held the old man's hand with both hands. He was extremely respectful and kind. It was impossible to see the disgust he had for the old man in his heart. Bai Yulan went to handle the confirmation procedures for the room. Su Lu sat on the sofa in the lobby. His eyes were misty as he looked at the crowd beside the car outside the hotel. He narrowed his eyes. The old man beside the car seemed to be an extraordinary person. But who was the man who had sent him off? He was so beautiful that he could compete with Shi Qinghai. Shang Qiu sat beside him. She took off the strapless black slippers on her feet and casually stepped on her bare feet. She hugged her knees and looked especially cute. These past few days, the technicians from the Nutshell Engineering Department had participated in 4 seminars on mecha standards in accordance with the government's requirements. They had been running around the special administrative region of the capital city and were really tired. She followed Su Li's gaze and looked over. She smiled slightly and said, "Do you know that important person?" Su Li shook his head. Director Lin Yuanhu. Shang Qiu's smile had a trace of playfulness. She pressed her face against her knees and yawned. The person you can't forget. I didn't expect you to not know him at all. That old man was the leader of the Federation's academic community. Su Lu narrowed his eyes. He had seen enough important people in his life, but Lin Yuanhu was the first person he had to defeat. So, at this time, his feelings were inevitably complicated. Since the old man was Lin Yuanhu, then the identity of the handsome young man who had sent the old man out of the hotel was naturally obvious. Other than the young master of the Li family, who else could be so devilishly beautiful and yet so calm? He turned his head and looked at the sleepy Shang Qiu. He couldn't help but shake his head. In the lobby of a high-class hotel, she could still be so relaxed and carefree. If the company had not reserved a room in advance, this hotel might have kicked them all out. A pair of small, white feet stepped on the edge of the sofa, a piece of leaf stuck to the heels. Su Li's gaze flickered, and he saw that face without any makeup but still clean and pretty. Also, because of her current posture, the curve of her chest was stubbornly bouncing up and down under the pressure. He had to admit that Shang Qiu did have the ability to charm people. It was just that her brain was already good enough, there was really no need to show off anything. The Nutshell Company was one of the leading corporations in the Federation. This time, when it came to the competition for the new mecha standards, the company naturally would not be stingy in terms of funding. They had directly booked the entire 24 floors of this high-class hotel that the politicians and wealthy businessmen of the Federation loved. The technical team took up 6 of the rooms, and the remaining rooms were handed over to the security team sent by the Whitewater Company. The remaining few rooms were left for Major Lan Xiaolong and his soldiers. Although it was said that the upper management of the Nutshell Company had some objections to the Ministry of Defense sending personnel to protect their own employees, when they thought of what the independent director had done that rainy night, the company's upper management could only remain silent. After that independent technical director had left Hong Kong that night, he had been staying in the hospital. The board of directors of the Nutshell Company had already passed the resolution to remove him from his position as a director. They were just waiting for the shareholders' meeting to officially pass the resolution, and then report it to the management committee of the Federation. Su Lu didn't care about that director's future. He stood by the window, looking at the square below the 24 floors, and the presidential residence further away, surrounded by green buildings. For the safety of the presidential residence, the height of the buildings in this area of the Capital Special District was strictly controlled. It was said that this high-class hotel named Green Sun was the tallest building in the district. The competition for the new Mecca standards of the Federation would come to a conclusion tomorrow at the presidential residence. Su-lo thought of this, and his mood became heavy. The competition for the standards wasn't sent to the Ministry of Defense, nor to the Academic Committee. President Sieg had directly put it on the agenda of the office. What did this mean? Bai Yulan knocked on the door and came in. She helped him tidy up his clothes, made a cup of green tea, and then walked behind him. Following his gaze, she knew what he was thinking. She said softly, "The Academy of Sciences seems to be very confident in the past few meetings." During the meetings, the two sides hadn't shown any specific technical data. Su-lo thought of the scene where Shang Qiu had confronted those old professors, and couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Shang Qiu's confidence came from her and her own abilities, but where did the Federal Academy of Sciences' confidence and even pride come from? "Their data is definitely better than ours," Su-lo said, "and they must have obtained Little White Flower's data through some means." "No confidence." Bai Yulan passed the tea to him and asked softly. Su-lo took the teacup and looked at the swirling tea leaves in the water. After a moment of silence, he said, "I only hope that the company's influence is big enough for Mr. President to give both sides a fair chance to compete." What would be a fair chance to compete? Of course, it would be a mecha battle. Su-lo lowered his head and took a sip of the tea, savoring the fragrance in the slightly hot tea. He turned to look at Bai Yulan and smiled. "MX is a new thing. I believe that no one in the Federation is more familiar with its controls than you. Do you have confidence?" Bai Yulan lowered her head and was silent for a long time. She would only express her confidence when she considered all the factors involved. From the first MX test to this year when Su-lo brought her into the Nutshell Engineering Department, she had seen it all. She had even participated in it personally and provided a lot of experience for the technical staff. Su-lo wasn't wrong. No one in the entire Federation was more familiar with this new mecha than her. "I have confidence. Even if the ace of the military came, it would be the same," Bai Yulan answered with her eyes lowered. "The Purple Sea from the Academy of Science might have a higher output power than Little White Flower," Su-lo reminded her. "Although I don't know what you did in the past, I think that Purple Sea definitely has a fatal problem." Bai Yulan raised her head and looked at him calmly. "As long as the pilot the Academy of Science is looking for is not Mad Manly, then it's fine." Su-lo nodded. He had also considered the issue of test pilots before. Madman Lee's ability was indeed terrifying, but the Lees of Philadelphia had always been on good terms with the Tai family. At such a crucial time, Madman Lee couldn't be involved in this matter. Bai Yulan suddenly thought of something and frowned. The key is that the Academy of Science might not agree to the request for a mecha battle. They have the advantage in terms of data. If they only use a written evaluation, the Federation's new standards may very well be based on theirs. Why do they have to do this? This matter is not up to them. Su-lo picked up his teacup and took another sip. He thought to himself that Secretary Shin's side had probably already made their move. The battle between the Federation's new MX mecha was definitely going to happen. The autumn rain had stopped long ago. Only a thin layer of fog hung over the streets of the Special Capital District. The other professors in the technical team obviously didn't sleep well. They were probably worried the entire night because of the standard confirmation meeting today. On the other hand, Su-lo and Shang Qiu seemed to be full of energy. Shang Qiu's confidence came from the things that Su-lo had told her, as well as a kind of fanatical worship of technology. Su-lo didn't have much confidence at all. He only believed in the influence that the Thai family had on the Federation. He even vaguely guessed that the meeting today at the president's office wouldn't be able to set the standards for the new Mecca at all. They would only come up with a method to set the standards. Of course, what he hoped for was a Mecca battle. This was the simplest and most direct way to slap the opponent in the face. The Nutshell Company's car picked them up from the entrance of the hotel. After only 5 minutes of driving, they arrived at the edge of a large green lawn. Everyone got out of the car and began to undergo strict security checks. The workstations that they brought with them were also moved to the president's office by specialized personnel. Sulu looked at these special task force agents who were wearing black suits and white earphones. They weren't unfamiliar to him. When he was with Tai Yuan, he had seen many of them. When he thought about how important the Thai family was to President Sigurd, he was much more confident about today's standard meeting. They walked along the path in the middle of the lawn toward the president's office in the distance. The white president's office was faintly discernible in the thin fog, but it didn't feel like it was floating. There was only a sense of solemnity from history and the awe of power. The president's office of the Federation would have its outer walls repainted every 10 years. The color of the outer walls was decided by the citizens through online voting. This decade, the color of the outer walls was white. From time to time, black cars would drive past them. Sulu, Shangqiu, and the others stepped to the side to let them pass. Looking at these custom-made luxury cars and the eye-catching special license plates on the cars, they knew that these people were all important people of the Federation who were here to attend the standard meeting today. Commander of the 1st Military Region, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Miles. Bai Yulan looked at the black car with the military license plate that had just driven past and whispered to Sulu. He was from the 17th Armored Division of the 1st Military Region, so he was naturally very familiar with the car of this military leader. The cars of these important people naturally didn't need to go through the outer security checks. Sulu narrowed his eyes and looked at the cars that disappeared into the fog. He knew that the National Security Advisor, the leaders of several major military regions, and many other important people were here. At this moment, his previous confidence was suddenly shaken. If these important people of the Federation were all inclined to adopt the standards of the Federal Academy of Science, would President Sigurd still care too much about Lady Tai's influence and the wishes of the Nutshell Company? He stopped thinking about these things and just looked at the cars that slowly drove past. As he looked at the president's office that was getting closer and closer, he felt some other emotions. This was the core of the Federation's power. These people were the embodiment of the will of tens of billions of citizens of the Federation. When he was at Donglane's Shonglo Street, he didn't dare to imagine that he would one day enter the president's office and pass by these important people. That it was still early when they entered the president's office, so the meeting hadn't started yet. The technical team of the Nutshell Company was arranged to wait in the lounge. Shangqiu was going to represent them to give the final concluding speech. At this moment, she was not just silently eating the snacks on her plate. "Are you a bit nervous?" Sulu gently clenched his fist and looked at the oil paintings on the walls of the lounge. Thinking that these were the things that the presidents of the Federation had seen with their own eyes and even touched with their own hands, even though he was extremely slow when it came to power, he still felt a trace of the weight of history and the oppression of power. "A bit," Shangqiu said vaguely. She was wearing a light blue formal suit today, which set off her beautiful figure. "When I think about letting those politicians and generals listen to the lecture and explaining those complicated technical terms clearly, I feel a bit of a headache." "I thought your nervousness was the same as mine, because we are in the president's office." Sulu smiled bitterly. "I came here once when I was in the 3rd grade. Shangqiu wiped the crumbs from her mouth and looked at Su Li's shocked expression. She explained with a smile, "The president's office is open to tourists once a week." "What's so strange about it?" Su Lu scratched his head awkwardly. He was an orphan from Donglin, so he naturally didn't know about these things. An official from the president's office came to inform them. Shang Qiu followed him into the tightly shut conference room. The technical team of the Nutshell Company, including Su Lu, began to stare blankly at the door at the end of the corridor. They didn't know what was going on inside and whether Shang Qiu's presentation would be successful. It didn't take long for Shang Qiu to come back with a computer. She sat beside Su Lu, shook her head, and said, "I can't see any signs." "Then let's wait," Su Lu said. No one would have thought that this wait would go on for an entire day and night. The biscuits of the president's office were indeed delicious, and the tea was truly a product of mountain mist. However, it wasn't a good idea to keep eating like this. Su Lu looked worriedly at the door, a very bad feeling growing in his heart. Those important people had actually discussed for so long without a conclusion. One could imagine how intense the situation in the conference room must be. He was very worried. If the Federation government didn't even give the Nutshell Company a chance to battle Mecha, what else could he do? Everyone has seen the technical data. The National Security Advisor rubbed his somewhat numb forehead and said, "The Federal Academy of Sciences Purple Sea has the overall advantage." He looked at the president sitting at the back of the office and said with a smile, "Hu Fu, we've already given the Nutshell Company enough chances." Chapter 246. It was already late into the night. The Special Task Force agents in the garden around the president's official residence scanned their surroundings vigilantly. They listened to the system commands coming from their earpieces and did not relax in the slightest. They knew very well that if the Empire's spies had the ability to infiltrate the Federation and launch an attack on the president's official residence tonight, the Federation would definitely suffer the heaviest blow in history. This was because most of the current cabinet and most of the key members of the federal military were at the scene of the meeting in the president's office. Of course, under the glory of the Charter, no Empire spies had ever been able to penetrate deep into Planet S1. The Special Task Force agents' nervousness to a greater extent came from the weight of those important figures themselves. Mr. President Sieg, who only had 4 months left in his term, sat behind his desk and signed a document electronically. He then forwarded it to the office. Only then did he slowly raise his head and meet the National Security Advisor's gaze with a trace of sincerity, a trace of warning, and even a trace of pity. After a long silence, he said, "You guys discuss and come to a conclusion first." From 9:00 in the morning until midnight, the discussion in the president's official residence had not come to a conclusion, and there was no way to come to a conclusion. The new generation of mecha standards was indeed a big deal, but it was not enough for so many important figures to spend so much time on the approval of this standard. However, everyone in the official residence knew that the battle for mecha standards also faintly involved the issue of the next president, so they had to be cautious. The National Security Advisor, the commanders of the 1st Military Region, and the 2nd Military Region had already expressed their opinions. Since the Federal Academy of Sciences data was clearly superior to the Shell Motor Company's, the federal military should naturally adopt this set of standards. However, the president of the Shell Motor Company, who had been sitting in the corner all this time, refused to bow down and admit defeat under the support of the scientific advisor. In the end, the negotiations between the important political figures were not much different from a fight between children. With such a huge interest involved, no one would easily give in. During these dozens of hours of intermittent discussion, only Commander Zhong of the 4th Military Region of the West Woods, who was remotely connected, and the commander of the 3rd Military Region, who was sandwiched in the middle, had remained silent. President Sigurd glanced at the faces in the room, each with a different expression and different thoughts. He had a very different thought than usual. His term was coming to an end, and the members of the cabinet would naturally not discuss things as they used to. He knew very well that many people, including the National Security Advisor, were already considering their interests after the next president took office. It was just like the dramas that described the dynasty era. The officials could surrender and have other intentions, but the emperor could not do so. President Sigurd knew very well that he was not the emperor, but he did not need to be like these people and consider too many benefits. Even if he did help one side, could he still be the next president? In a few more months' time, he would only be an ex-president, and the treatment and respect he deserved would not be reduced in the slightest. It was precisely because of this reason that he had not made a final decision regarding the mecha standards this time around. Even though the Academy of Sciences mecha standards had already received the support of the majority of the military, and the Shell Motor Company's efforts could be wasted at any moment, President Sieg remained silent. The two major factions in the Federation government had already shed all pretense of cordiality at this moment, and the side that supported the Federal Academy of Science had already gained an overwhelming advantage. The National Security Advisor narrowed his eyes and looked at President Sigurd, thinking to himself, "You are just a pile of mud that you helped into office. Who would allow you to play these kinds of tricks at this time?" This teacher and close friend of Mr. President was just about to use words to force President Sigurd to make a decision when a notification sounded in the office's communication system. Space Fleet connecting. Hearing this, everyone in the President's office perked up. Even Commander Zhong, who had been dozing off on the screen, slowly raised his head. In this kind of situation, if that 3-star female general of the Space Fleet expressed some kind of opinion, it would be decisive. After filtering the image for a while, the face of a female general appeared on the screen hanging in the President's office. This female general was around 45 years old. Her facial features were cold, and the lines of her face were as sharp as a knife. Looking at her made people feel as if they were stabbed in the heart by an ice knife. Hong Yuliang, the only 3-star female general of the Federation. She led the 3 major fleets of the Federation and walked in the universe. She fought at the edge of the interstellar system, and her achievements were outstanding. It had been 4 years since she had landed on the surface of a planet. She was like a meteorite in the universe, full of sharp edges and cold. What are your thoughts? President Sigurd recounted the previous discussion and the dispute between the two sides and asked the female general on the screen. Mr. President, I have already looked at the technical data of both sides. I think that the Federal Academy of Science has the advantage. The female general on the screen looked at everyone coldly and said, "The threat of the Empire is right in front of you, and you people still have so much interest in scheming against each other. Don't you know the meaning of shame?" Everyone in the President's office was a big shot. Although General Hong Yuliang had a lot of experience and great achievements, any one of them would be able to suppress her. However, she just had to say it so bluntly, directly piercing through the masks on everyone's faces. Everyone in the office smiled helplessly, but they didn't have any strong reactions. They were all very clear about this female general's temper. No one could do anything to her. Mr. President, time is of the essence. I support the standards of the Academy of Science, said Hong Yuliang. Actually, that's what I mean. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was also the commander of the 1st Military Region, sighed tiredly and said, "The Empire is already ready to make a move. The people don't know, but we know. We can't waste any more time on these things." After the words of the two big shots in the military came out, the expression on the face of the president of the Shell Motor Company became a bit ugly. He looked at the president's scientific advisor, and they both knew that they might lose without a fight today. Although President Sigurd's attitude was still unclear, most of the generals in the military had already expressed their attitudes. In this kind of situation, the president also had to respect the other party. The vice president who represented the Academy of Science stood up with a smile and said to the general in the office and the two generals on the screen, "The results of the conference have already proven that the purple seed developed by the Academy of Science has completely suppressed the design of the Shell Motor Company in all aspects. I can guarantee to the Federation that the new mecha from the Academy of Science will definitely be able to help the Federal Army achieve unprecedented success in the war with the Empire. Just as he finished speaking, the heavy wooden door of the President's office was pushed open. The Deputy Director of the office, Boog, walked in with a strange expression and said, "Philadelphia called." The atmosphere in the President's office became abnormally strange because of the words, "Philadelphia called." The commanders of the 3 military regions and the female general of the Space Fleet began to tidy up their military uniforms. Commander Zhong of the 4th Military Region opened his eyes abruptly, and the rest of the people were slightly stiff. They didn't know if this sentence was true or not. Philadelphia called. That old man seemed to have not cared about the affairs of the Federation for more than 10 years. Why did he take the initiative to contact the President today when discussing the mecha standards? The expression of the National Security Advisor froze for a moment before returning to normal. He also didn't think that such an unexpected situation would happen, but then he thought that no matter how respectable that old man's status was, this was still an important matter for the Federation. The other party couldn't just use his status to mess around. There was no video, but an old voice sounded from the phone in the President's office. A mecha standard actually took 1 day and 1 night to discuss. Then if the Empire invades again, do we have to discuss this for 2 months? Do we even need to invite the members of the Federation Management Committee to participate in the discussion? President Sieg smiled slightly and said into the phone, "Do you have any suggestions?" The voice on the other end of the phone said slowly, "Mechas are used for battle. The data is not important. 2 mechas fight, and we just need to see the result." The President's office was silent. No one would have thought that this great military god, who had not spoken about the Federation's affairs for more than 10 years, would actually speak up for the sake of the new mecha standards. Furthermore, the method he suggested was so primitive and barbaric, and even a little naive. However, no one raised any objections. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Miles, stood up and saluted into the phone. He said, "General Miles reporting to the division commander. We will definitely complete the mission." Years ago, during the first intergalactic pursuit against the Empire, General Miles was the battalion commander of the 17th Armored Division, and General Pifu was the division commander of the 17th Armored Division. At this time, the other generals in the office had also stood up and listened respectfully to Fei Cheng's call. For the federal military, Fei Cheng's call was not a suggestion, but an order from their superiors. They only needed to follow orders. President Sieg stared at the phone in front of him. He did not feel that his authority was being challenged. Although the scene in front of him was a little ridiculous, and the Federation military did not respect the President and that old man, he knew that this was caused by history. As long as that old man was still alive, the Federation President's position in the hearts of the military would never be as high as it was stipulated in the Constitution. The National Security Advisor had been silent all this time. At this time, he suddenly said, "Sir Marshal, if a mecha battle is to take place, naturally there needs to be a fair environment. Can we allow both sides to freely choose their own pilots?" The battle for the new mecha standards of the Federation, after a day and a night of stalemate, was finally resolved with a phone call. It returned to the traditional mecha battle in the military camp. Although everyone knew that this method would not be able to fully display the new mecha standards of both sides, it was still a relatively fair method. Su Lu, who had been in the lounge of the President's official residence for more than 10 hours, finally heard the news after going to the washroom a few times. This news was not unexpected. It was also the best method he had imagined, because the Academy of Sciences mecha data did indeed have the advantage. However, he did not know what kind of struggles and secret compromises the big shots in the Federation's cabinet had gone through in order to achieve this mecha battle. He also did not know that this situation had been decided by the military god of Fei Qing. Other than Shang Qiu, who had entered the president's office to explain, the rest of the technical team had not had the chance to enter. They had originally planned to explain some of the characteristics of the MX mecha to those big shots, but it seemed that those big shots did not need this at all. They would only do things according to their wishes. That night, returning to the 24th floor of the hotel, Sulu looked at the dimming lights of the president's official residence in the distance. Thinking of Mr. CEO's solemn instructions, his heart also became heavy. This was already the last chance they could fight for. In a mecha battle, Nutshell definitely could not afford to lose. The mecha battle location has been chosen at the Old Moon base. Sulu took the teacup and said seriously to Bai Yulan beside him, "The time is 3 days later. There's still time to make the initial preparations. However, this place is disadvantageous for us. The low-gravity environment will magnify the difference in instantaneous power output. Mobility is especially important at the Old Moon base. You need to be mentally prepared." Bai Yulan held her teacup with both hands and nodded lightly. She said softly, "Understood." Sulu turned around, his eyelids drooping as he repeated the calculations he had done countless times in his mind. He said, "You must force the opponent into an overclocking battle." The Academy of Science did not do enough self-checks, so they definitely haven't discovered that problem yet. Under the overclocking state of the electronic jets, the longest stable time is only 3 minutes. You just need to drag on for 3 minutes, and their purple sea will be destroyed for everyone to see. Concentrating the power of both engines to make an instantaneous increase in power output was an operation that would only be used in an absolutely intense mecha battle. At this time, Su Li's request for Bai Yulan to drag the Academy of Sciences Purple Sea into this state and maintain it for 3 minutes was a very difficult request. "No problem." Bai Yulan lowered her head and said softly, "After hearing what you said, my confidence is increasing. I even somewhat hope that the opponent will choose Mad Manly as their pilot." Sulu laughed, shook his head and said, "This possibility is too small." Previously, the president said that this mecha battle was the intention of the Lees of Philadelphia. It's obvious that they are helping us. How can Mad Manly participate? Li Xiuzhu stood by the window with a gloomy expression. He didn't know that Sulu had been standing by another window not far away, looking at the president's residence with him. The news that came earlier made him feel somewhat unhappy. His family had spent a lot of money to convince the National Security Advisor. They had also used their relationship with the First Military Region and the threat of the Empire to make the big bosses of the federal military firm their stance. However, he didn't expect that all of this would disappear because of a call from Philadelphia. "Don't worry about anything." There was only one energy-saving lamp in the room, so the light was somewhat dim. The president of the Academy of Science, Lin Yuanhu, sat on the sofa in the luxurious suite. His expression was very calm as he looked at this young nephew of his and said, "It's just 3 days later than scheduled." Li Xiuzhu turned his head and forcefully hid the trace of displeasure on his face. He smiled and said, "It's good that Uncle Lin has confidence. I have confidence in the research ability of the Academy of Science." Lin Yuanhu's expression slightly darkened. This afternoon, he and Li Xiuzhu had been waiting in the hotel for the news from the president's residence. Because of the press conference that the Federal Academy of Science held without authorization, this old man knew that President Sieg had a lot of opinions about him. Even the big bosses of the military had secretly scolded him. It was all thanks to the Li family's help that the anger was quelled. Since this was the case, it was naturally inconvenient for him to go to the president's office. Therefore, he only sent a deputy president as his representative. However, he didn't expect that after waiting for more than 10 hours, he would end up with such an awkward result. A trace of displeasure and vigilance appeared in the heart of this leader of the Federation's academic community. "You rest first. I still have to arrange some things." Li Xiuzhu smiled slightly and walked out of the room. Just outside the room, he first called his father. The head of the Li family naturally already knew about the decision of the president's residence, but he needed to know if there were any follow-up arrangements from his father's side. The head of the Li family's calm voice came from the other end of the phone. "There's nothing for you to do now. The National Security Advisor will take care of it." "Yes, father." In the afternoon of the second day, Major Li Feng, who had been on his shift from the front lines and had stayed in the capital ring for almost half a year, walked out of the Army General Hospital with a dark expression. Zhou Yu had already been discharged from the hospital, but no one had informed him. Although with his background, even if he rushed into the West Mountain compound, no one would dare to stop him, but after all, he still had to think about the honor of his family. Thinking about the phone call he had received from the Ministry of Defense, Li Feng's expression became even darker. They actually wanted him to go to the Old Moon base to participate in some kind of mecha battle. Or was it on behalf of those old scumbags from the Academy of Science? Now, he was very clear that Su Le had participated in the MX of the Nutshell Mobile. Once he thought of the possibility of smashing that brat's hard work into pieces, he had a kind of desire and excitement. However, Madman Li was not a real lunatic after all. He knew very well that there were many things hidden behind this phone call. "Father, what's going on?" Li Feng asked the middle-aged general on the other end of the phone. "I remember you said last time that the MX of the Nutshell Mobile seems to have some connection with the Madam side. The National Security Advisor mentioned this matter to your grandfather. After all, you are a soldier, so naturally, you have to obey military orders. It's not good for the family to say anything." Li Feng seemed to have understood something. He suddenly had the urge to beat the white-haired National Security Advisor to death. But in the blink of an eye, he felt a trace of excitement. It was always good to be able to participate in this matter. After a moment of silence on the other end of the phone, his father said, "Our Li family has a personal relationship with the Federation, but there are no factions. We are only loyal to, and can only be loyal to, the Federation. The MX Mecha is involved in the great matter of resisting the invasion of the Empire. Do your best and choose the best one. This is what your grandfather told you." Chapter 247. In the deep blue space, countless stars were quietly watching the spaceships flying among them. The people on the spaceships were also watching them. In the field of vision below the dark star field, a giant hexagonal space station was reflecting the light of the stars. It was brighter than any of the stars in the field. The hexagonal space station quietly overlooked the surface of planet S1, ready to accept the spaceships that leaped out of the atmosphere at any time. Su Le stood beside the porthole, squinting his eyes as he watched the space station not far away. He was slightly excited. He had experienced space travel before. The last time he took the ancient bell from Donglin to the capital ring, it was at the giant space station that he took the spaceship to transfer to. However, the spaceship he took today did not stop at the space station. Instead, it directly broke through the gravitational pull and atmosphere of planet S1 and flew into space, heading towards the Old Moon base. The Shell Motor Company had its own commercial fleet. It was not large in number, but its performance was excellent. The technical team was going to the Old Moon base to participate in the test battle of the new MX Mecha. Naturally, the headquarters provided the best spaceship, so there was no need to resupply or transfer at the space station. The light of the stars outside the windows suddenly dimmed. Su Le knew that the spaceship was changing direction. He walked back to his seat and looked at the serious expressions of his companions. He could not help but feel a little nervous. The technical staff of the Shell Motor Company were all wearing dark gray military uniforms. This was because, in a sense, they were all non-staff members of the Federal Army. Even Shang Qiu was a civilian major. In this spaceship, the only people who were not wearing military uniforms were Secretary Bai, who was beside Su Lo, and the CEO, who was sitting in the luxurious private room at the front of the spaceship. Bai Yulan had made a big mistake in the army years ago and was expelled from the army. The CEO did not want to use military uniforms to boost his confidence. The CEO of the Shell Motor Company, if placed in a place like East Forest or West Woods of the Federation, would be at the level of a district chief executive. A few days ago, the attitude of the Shell Motor Company during the internal struggle of the Federation was clearly not in line with the status of this giant company in the Federation. Sula thought of the CEO, who was in his 40s and had some doubts in his heart. The CEO of the Shell Motor Company had not shown much in the past few days. The main reason was that the management committee of the Federation had appointed him as the CEO of the Shell Motor Company less than a year ago. Coincidentally, when he took over, many problems within the company. After the failure of the experiment last autumn, the Federal Academy of Science shamelessly and overbearingly joined in with the excuse of participating in the design of the dual-engine technology. This was an official decision made by the Federation's academic committee, so the Shell Motor Company could not use this to accuse the other party. However, right after that, the Academy of Science had stolen the data from Shen Yulan's laboratory. That independent director of the Shell Motor Company had also encountered some problems. All these troubles had gathered together, making this newly appointed CEO angry but also somewhat anxious. If the internal strife within the Shell Motor Company's board was like the internal strife within the Federation and had not been completely settled, the CEO could not spend all his time on these political squabbles. He knew better than anyone the importance of the MX Mecha to the Federation and to the company. Thus, he personally led the technical team and boarded this spaceship headed for the old moon. The flight through space was truly rather tedious. Those provocatively dressed dancers on the screen did not attract too much attention. Everyone in the technical team was deep in thought about the mecha battle that would begin the day after tomorrow, analyzing the technical aspects that they were responsible for to ensure that there would not be any loopholes. Shang Qiu had not come with the technical team. The mecha battle testing, data analysis, and evaluation work at the Old Moon base would be carried out in the control hall on the ground. She still had very important work to do, so she had stayed behind. Su Lu looked at Bai Yulan beside him, who had her head lowered the entire time. He could not help but think that if Shang Qiu had been by his side right now, the journey would probably not have been so boring. Secretary Bai was too quiet, she really was not a good travel companion. Right at this moment, a voice rang out from the communicator. Su Lu was slightly taken aback, but then he got up from his chair and walked towards the room where the CEO was. Not long after, he walked back and sat back down with a heavy expression on his face. He could not help but glance at Bai Yulan again, wondering if he should tell her this news now or when the mecha battle begins. Bai Yulan saw the change in his mood and asked softly, "The other side has chosen?" "Yes." The mecha battle testing this time was of the utmost importance and had attracted the attention of countless people. Both sides would definitely choose the most experienced and most capable pilot in the Federation. Sula guessed that the other side would not have guessed that Nutshell Company had long since made the decision to use Bai Yulan as their pilot. However, he also did not expect that the other side would actually have a way to persuade that fellow to come personally. After a moment of silence, he said, "It's mad manly." Bai Yulan's delicate eyebrows rose, then calmed down. Like a small stone thrown into a lake, it settled down after a slight ripple. After a moment of silence, he took out a cigarette from his pocket, lit it up, and took a deep puff. Su Lu had always thought that Secretary Bai did not smoke. He did not know that that night, when Bai Yulan had seen him operate the old mecha and make so many fierce attacks, she had secretly smoked a cigarette. He also did not know that when MX had succeeded, Bai Yulan had also smoked a cigarette. It was not that Secretary Bai did not smoke, but he would only light one when he felt a real tremor. The smoke detectors in the spaceship began to beep, and the electronic female voice began to warn them. The surrounding technical team members were all startled out of their thoughts and looked curiously at Su Lo and Bai Yulan's seats. Then, they saw the two heavy and slightly tired faces, and in an instant, they understood something. Hearing the warning from the electronic female voice, Su Li's mood was somewhat irritated, and he wanted nothing more than to kick the loudspeaker away. What I was afraid of has come. Bai Yulan only took 3 puffs before the cigarette between her fingers burned to a crisp. He coughed lightly and said, "Boss, looks like the people behind you are not as powerful as you think." At some point in time, Bai Yulan had begun to refer to Su Lo as boss. Perhaps it was because of the 20 million Federation dollars. Su Lo knew what she meant. In the special capital region, the two of them had had a long conversation. The Tai family, who had always stood behind Su Lo, had always had a close relationship with the Lees of Philadelphia. Why did that lunatic from the Lee family want to interfere in this mecha battle this time? Mr. CEO had also just received the news. Su Lo was currently in the spaceship. Even though he had hundreds of questions in his heart, he could not make a phone call to clear them all up, so he could only remain silent. Secretary Bai lowered his eyes slightly, and his fingers slowly pinched the remaining half of the cigarette. Thinking of the insufferably arrogant opponent in 2 days, he also fell silent. Just as the two of them were silent, a barren planet appeared in front of the spaceship. The earthy yellow surface of the planet was even clearer under the light of the stars. Only the pearl-like structures on the surface and the black materials scattered all around reminded people that this was not an uninhabited barren planet, but the largest companion of Planet S1, Old Moon. Humanity's second entry into the universe, and the first planet to be officially developed was one of the 2 moons, Old Moon. In the literature, this satellite that had accompanied Planet S1 for billions of years was called Moon Number 1, but the people of the Federation usually called it Old Moon. The development of the Old Moon had been going on for many years. Although scientists had tried to recreate the ecosystem, they had failed time and time again. The phenomenon of atmospheric escape in a low-gravity environment could not be eliminated. However, the development of the Old Moon by humans was extremely deep. Those pearl-like structures that could be seen from space were actually as many as 700 residential bases. The bases were covered with high-strength multi-layer rigid membranes that filtered the blazing light of the stars and the omnipresent cosmic rays. At the same time, the life support system of the bases was isolated from the outside world. The black material that was about to cover a quarter of Old Moon's land area was transformed from the mineral resources of the 4 neighboring planets into a solar energy collection and absorption material. Now, it was completely capable of supplying energy to countless military and civilian bases on Old Moon. The ubiquitous black was one of the 5 largest planetary transformation activities in the history of the Federation. It cost a lot of money and time, and it was one of the greatest glories of humanity. Under the pen of a poet, they would often describe how the giant pen of humanity painted a barren planet in the sky with a layer of unnatural color. It was naturally earth-shattering to be able to change the world. Of the 700 bases on Old Moon, the largest was naturally the Federal Military's main assembly base and the Shell Motor Company's spaceship manufacturing factory. It was said that in the military control zone on the dark side of the moon, there was a super-large base that was specifically responsible for supplying the 3 major fleets of the Federation. However, the ordinary people of the Federation would never be able to see its true appearance. Under the guidance of the Flight Control Center on Old Moon's surface, a pale white commercial spaceship drew a nearly straight arc as it headed towards the predetermined landing site. Just by looking at the exterior design of this spaceship, it was obvious that this was a direct endurance spaceship that could break through the S1 atmosphere. On the side of the spaceship was a line of very eye-catching words: "Where there is metal, there is fruit shell." Seeing the pearl-like large bases becoming clearer and clearer, the technical team members on the spaceship had already stood up and let out waves of exclamations. Humanity's transformation of the universe always made these engineers feel a sense of respect from the bottom of their hearts. These engineers and professors were researching mecha, not space battleships. For most of them, this was their first time at old moon bases, and that kind of excitement was indescribable. At this time, they were not even willing to think about the mecha battle that would take place the day after tomorrow. The boundless black sea that stretched out like the grasslands of the Eastwood region was indeed an extremely magnificent sight. And those pearl-like bases that were covered by a giant membrane were also an exciting process. Su-Luk should have been excited by everything in front of him, but the extremely bad news during the journey made his heart feel a little heavy, and he actually somewhat ignored this magnificent scenery. The Shell Motor Company's exclusive spaceship did not land at its own base, but instead flew directly to the Ministry of Defense's Space Assembly Base. Accompanied by the loud sound of airflow and the electronic positioning siren, the spaceship steadily landed on the dock, and then a large piece of shrinking equipment placed it underground. The alarm was lifted, and the technical team disembarked from the spaceship. They sat on the self-propelled electric scooter below the spaceship and followed the 10-kilometer-long underground tunnel towards the dark and quiet front. Mr. CEO had a special car to pick him up and had already left. The moment they left, Su-Luk noticed that Mr. CEO's expression was a little gloomy. Beside him, his secretary was holding a phone and arguing non-stop with certain parties. The CEO of Nutshell probably also smelled a trace of danger. There were too many people in the Federation who did not want Nutshell to get the standard for the new mecha. Thinking of this, Su-Luk could not help but feel a little cold. Even if the Iron Schemer was one of the 7 great families in the Federation, how could they have such a huge influence? He looked at his phone and confirmed that there was signal in the underground tunnel, so he directly called Secretary Shin. Over the phone, he told the other party the news he had just received, and then quietly waited for the other party to reply. Shinli was silent for a long time on the other end of the phone before saying, "I just verified this news. According to the intelligence report, it should be that Senator Macklin who gave the idea to the National Security Advisor. As for the Philadelphia side, I don't have that kind of influence." "What about the madam?" Su-Luk continued to ask. If it was in the past, no matter who the other party chose to be the pilot, it would not affect his confidence in Little White Flower and his judgment of the Purple Sea. However, Li Feng was different. He was a madman, the only grandson of the Lees of Philadelphia, and a rare super pilot in the federal military. At this time, if Su-Luk and Madman Li were to fight, he would not mind. However, as Bai Yulan had said before, when it came to mecha piloting, Madman Li's ability was too terrifying. This was a result of his battle record. Sitting under the huge dome, Su-Luk looked at the layer of transparent film 10 meters away from him through the glass. He was curious about the material of the film and the operating principle of the gravity replenishment device in the base. Only when he was in space could he truly feel the extent to which the technological civilization of the Federation had developed over the past tens of thousands of years. Even though he was known as a genius in mechanical engineering, it was impossible for him to completely understand the intricate technological fields. After a few calls, there was no good news. Mr. CEO's secretary had called earlier and helplessly said that the company's negotiations with the Federation government had all failed. This was because in the meeting in the president's office, the military god of the Lees of Philadelphia had personally promised the National Security Advisor that both parties could choose whichever pilot they wanted. It was because of this heavy mood that Su-Luk decided to just focus on the structure of the final assembly base. However, no matter how he looked at the scene in space outside the film, he still could not calm down. There was even a faint trace of regret in his heart. If he had known this would happen, should he have asked Madman Li to be the pilot for Nutshell first? The living area of the final assembly base was very quiet. On the dome about a few hundred meters high, the automatic superlight cleaning maintenance robot was slowly working along the alloy framework. Su picked up the teacup in front of him and took a sip. He then felt that his thoughts were really a little unfair to Bai Yulan in front of him. What you said in the hotel that day was a lie, Bai Yulan said softly. Bai Yulan said softly, I've seen Li Feng operate a mecha with my own eyes. I don't have the slightest bit of confidence against him. However, since our goal is only to drag that purple sea into an unrestricted battle for 3 minutes, it is possible. Hearing this, Su Li's mood gradually calmed down. If they wanted to go head-to-head with the only remaining seedling of the Lees of Philadelphia, there was no point in looking for other ace pilots in the federal military. In comparison, Secretary Bai's understanding of the new MX mecha was deeper than anyone else's. Moreover, Su had always believed that this delicate man's strength had never been fully utilized. It won't change anything, Su picked up the teacup and said seriously, let's deal with him. Bai Yulan picked up the teacup and clinked it lightly with him. After hurriedly finishing the cup of tea, the technical team did not stay for long. They immediately rushed towards the core area of the base. Yesterday, Nutshell's MX mecha had already been transported from the port to the Old Moon base under the close watch of the military. According to the schedule, they were about to begin the mecha combat test, modifying the outer armor and weakening the firepower of the mecha. The technical team members of Nutshell's engineering department naturally had to watch with their own eyes. Otherwise, who knew what those mechanics from the Ministry of National Defense would do to their precious mecha? The members of the technical team went through the chip scan one by one and obtained temporary access to the Old Moon base. They walked towards the underground warehouse. They saw the mecha in the center of the warehouse in the distance and began to get excited. Although it had only been 7 days since they last saw each other, to these people, it felt like a long time. Su and Bai Yulan were still walking at the back. There was no problem with the chip scan. However, just as the two of them were about to enter the warehouse, a group of armed soldiers surrounded them. Su, the technical director of the Nutshell Engineering Department? An official in a black suit asked coldly. Su narrowed his eyes and said, yes. You can go in now. This person stays, the official said as he pointed at Bai Yulan. Su narrowed his eyes even more. He asked, why? Bai Yulan was suspected of illegally selling military equipment to foreign countries. Therefore, he cannot enter the core area, the official replied. Su knew about Secretary Bai's crimes. However, the military court did not convict him. Why did some people suddenly appear at such an important time? Unexpectedly, the faction from the Federal Academy of Science started to make their move again. Not only did they use Madman Li as a test pilot, they also tried to stop Bai Yulan at the last minute. He looked at the official's cold face and suddenly said, this is a test pilot from Nutshell's company. He cannot enter the core area. Then how will the mecha battle start? Can you bear this kind of responsibility? Not only can he not enter the core area, he will have to follow me immediately for further investigation. The official smiled and said, you don't have to scare me with the MX mecha battle. I am not a Federation official. Are you done yet? Are you done yet? Su could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. He stared into the official's eyes and said loudly, I don't care what kind of fucking official you are. If you dare to stop us, let's see how you will answer to the president. Chapter 248. Su had met many big shots in the Federation. Not to mention the president, who had been very kind to him throughout the journey and had solemnly instructed him to do so. Even the mother and son of the Tai family, as well as General Zhou Yingxing, were all big shots that could shake the surface of a planet with just a word from the Federation. However, meeting big shots did not mean that he could completely understand the way they did things. To be more precise, he still had not gotten rid of the moral standards of the citizens at the bottom of the hierarchy. He always thought that no matter if it was a politician or a politician, they would still need to maintain their dignity and do things according to the rules of the Federation. Even if they were faced with a strong conflict of interest, the way these people snatched benefits was always elegant, calm, and confident. It was just like how the Federal Academy of Science took the data of Professor Shin from the Husk Institute. Everything was done so cleanly, and they looked down from above, swallowed mountains and rivers, and silently flowed like a clear spring, until today, when he first heard that Mad Manly was selected to be the pilot, and then this guy who called himself an official of the Bureau of Proclamation led soldiers to stop by Yulan and was about to arrest her. Sulu finally understood that when the big shots in the upper echelons of the Federation had their fundamental interests infringed, they would not hesitate to show their greedy and cold appearance. As long as they had the slightest reason, they would use extreme methods and do things to the extreme. They would endlessly show the realm of shamelessness that they could reach. What does this have to do with the Bureau of Proclamation? If you want to go to military court, it's the Department of Defense's business. Because of this understanding, Sulu could no longer suppress the anger that he had been suppressing for a long time. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the official in front of him. His gaze was like a knife that could cut the indifferent face of the other party into countless mottled pieces at any moment. Correspondingly, he could no longer play the role of a silent, optimistic, and cheerful technician. Instead, he began to emit a lonely and ruthless aura from his bones. What does this have to do with the Bureau of Proclamation? The Bureau of Proclamation doesn't need to tell you. The official ignored his anger and replied with a smile. The Bureau of Proclamation was usually only responsible for coordinating with the work of the government. They rarely showed themselves directly. Today's trip to the Old Moon base was due to the persuasion of some powerful people within the Federation government. In fact, the Shell Motor Company had already entered the Old Moon base. At this time, only a transcendental existence like the Bureau of Proclamation would dare to challenge the rules of the entire Federation. They would not hesitate to destroy an important new mecha test battle just to arrest this pilot named by Yulan. This official was not worried about the Shell Motor Company's counterattack. The Bureau of Proclamation rarely took action, but once it did, no government would dare to go against it, let alone an enterprise. Under the glory of the First Charter, these officials seemed to be covered with a layer of inviolable brilliance. Su Lut stood in front of Bai Yulan and unceremoniously slapped the gun barrel away. His strength was so great that even a casual slap caused the soldier's wrist to ache. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became tense. What are you looking at? Sulu narrowed his eyes and scanned the stiff attitude of the soldiers around him. He said in a low voice, "Shoot me if you dare." At this time, he naturally thought of that rainy night in the industrial park of Harbor City. However, at that time, he and Bai Yulan were facing the mercenaries of the Whitewater Company. Today, however, he was facing an official from the Bureau of Proclamation and the soldiers of the Federation. Over and over again, the schemes of the upper class of the Federation and the cold and unreasonable sledgehammers kept falling on his head. He was really tired of it. However, last time, he had the military order of the Ministry of Defense to protect him. This time, he was facing the Bureau of Proclamation. Who would come down from the sky to save him and Bai Yulan? The day after tomorrow, the government of the Federation would secretly conduct a mecha battle test. At this time, Sulu believed that the other party would not dare to use violence. He also could not allow these soldiers to arrest Secretary Bai. If the ace pilots he had secretly prepared for several months were all arrested, who would go up against that madman Li the day after tomorrow? Bai Yulan kept his head down and stood behind him. He did not stand in front of him to block the muzzle of the gun like he usually did. Perhaps it was because the other party's sudden attack today was related to him. He was even more silent than usual. However, when he saw Su Lo angrily pull out the gun barrel, the corners of his eyes trembled slightly. He vaguely remembered the feeling of being protected by his comrades in the military camp all those years ago. The technical team members who had finished scanning the area noticed the strange movement at the door. They all walked back. After knowing the truth of the matter, their expressions changed drastically. They threw away the elegant demeanor of a scholar and scolded the Bureau of Proclamation official and the soldiers. They also threatened to inform the Ministry of Defense immediately. However, it was obvious that the Ministry of Defense could not threaten the Bureau of Proclamation official. In fact, this official had only taken a document from the Bureau of Proclamation and was able to command the soldiers stationed at the Old Moon base to do as he wished. This kind of authority was terrifying. Sulu was calling the CEO. Since the other party had used such a shameless move, other than the CEO himself, the technical team members could not think of any other way. However, the call did not go through. Whether it was the CEO or the secretary's phone, both were turned off. He narrowed his eyes. He knew that the other party must have been prepared. Perhaps, the departure of the CEO was arranged by the other party. Bai Yulan's hands were hidden in her sleeves. Suddenly, she sighed and slowly took her hands out. From this sigh, Su Lu could hear many emotions. There was unwillingness to accept defeat, as well as helplessness and disappointment. Bai Yulan had joined the army when he was 15 years old. He didn't have any background or support. When he entered the Special Mecha Battalion of the 17th Armored Division, his small knife and his amazing mecha piloting skills were his true foundation. It was also because of his achievements on the front lines that he was only expelled from the army after he violated the military order. He wasn't sent to the military court. Even though she was a fierce veteran, after knowing that the opponent's pilot was Mad Manly from Philadelphia, she still wanted to avoid the battle. During this journey in space, Bai Yulan had done a lot of psychological preparation. She had stimulated the most powerful part of her mental world. That was why she could calmly say those words to Su Lu at the tea table. Bai Yulan had already decided to give it her all and leave no regrets. She wanted to see just how strong the grandson of her teacher was. However, just as she was about to summon her tiger chi, she was blocked by a pack of jackals and wolves in the forest. Heroes should have a place to use their abilities. Those people wanted to shamelessly take away this opportunity from Bai Yulan when he was at his peak. That sigh had a sense of unwillingness and indifference from the corner of Su Li's eyes. She noticed that Bai Yulan was not holding the delicate knife when she took it out of her pocket. Bai Yulan lowered her eyes and said, "I'll go with you." She had to go. The situation now was different from that rainy night. The faction led by the Federal Academy of Science was not even afraid to use their connections within the Bureau of Proclamation to prove that they were determined to win the Federation Mecha Standard battle at all costs. Although the destruction of Jade and Stone was tragic, the problem was that the opponent had only piled up a pile of firewood. Su Lu, on the other hand, was a 1,000-year-old gem in this mecha battle. Bai Yulan could not just stand by and watch Su Lu fall into the opponent's trap because of his anger. "If you leave, what will we do?" scolded Su Lu angrily. "They just don't want me to participate in this mecha battle," said Bai Yulan softly. "At most, they'll just lock me up for a few days and I'll be fine. As for the mecha battle the day after tomorrow, you can go on your own." These last few words, Secretary Bai had said them very softly. Only Su Lu, who was standing in front of her, could hear them. A strange light flashed through Su Li's eyes. He had not expected Secretary Bai to make such a suggestion. That said, Bai Yulan stretched out her hands. He knew that he was still paying back his debts for all the mistakes he had made in the military back then, as well as last autumn in Bermuda. Since the Bureau of Proclamation had appeared, they had naturally evaded the blockade of Unit 83-84 and obtained evidence of his crimes directly. Who knew how many years he would be sentenced to by the Federation Court? No need. said the Bureau of Proclamation official with a smile. He too knew the significance of the mecha battle 2 days later. He was actually not very confident, so he only asked Bai Yulan to cooperate with the investigation. He had no intention of directly arresting her. After all, he had to take care of Nutshell's emotions. Bai Yulan looked at his smile, but did not feel the need to be taken care of. She smiled gently, and then silently kicked out with her leg, striking the official's lower abdomen. With a muffled thud, the Bureau of Proclamation official fell to the ground. His face was pale. He wanted to scream in pain, but the pain pierced deep into his lower abdomen, rendering him unable to speak. This kick had startled many people present. The soldiers immediately raised their guns. At this time, Bai Yulan lowered her head and said softly, "I've already stated that I won't resist arrest. I hit him because of a personal grudge. If you want to sue me in court for fighting, I don't mind." Su Le did not feel the slightest bit of relief from this kick. He looked silently at Bai Yulan, ignoring the official who was rolling on the ground in pain. He said, "I will get you out as soon as possible." Bai Yulan smiled slightly and said softly, "If you're angry, you need to vent. If you do things with this attitude the day after tomorrow, perhaps the results will surprise many people, including yourself." "I'm very angry." Su Le narrowed his eyes as he looked at the white MX mecha undergoing modification in the middle of the warehouse. He thought of the little white flower that Shang Qiu had named it, and thought of Bai Yulan who had already been taken away. He said into the phone, "I've never expected the Federation to be fair, but I also didn't expect that in the face of such a situation, those people would actually dare to play politics so brazenly." After the CEO of Nutshell Mobile had returned and found out that the pilot he had chosen had been taken away by the Bureau of Proclamation, he was naturally enraged to the extreme. He had even called the president directly, but since the matter involved the Bureau of Proclamation, even the president's office had no way of ordering the other party to release the pilot immediately. He had not expected that the other party would be so shameless and direct, not caring at all about the issue of face. In his anger, he had made several calls to the Ministry of National Defense and scolded the federal military, but he still could not change the fact that had already happened. Even Nutshell Mobile's request to use this matter to delay the mecha battle was flatly rejected by the National Security Advisor in charge of this mecha test this time. At this time, Su Le was on the phone with Zhou Yu. On one hand, he wanted to find out what was happening on the surface of Planet S1, and on the other hand, he wanted to vent the anger in his heart. On the surface of a conflict of interest, there is often a veneer of political harmony. However, if the benefits are big enough, people are not afraid to tear off this veneer and rush forward to snatch food, just like the wild beasts in the forest on the other side of the electronic fence. On the phone, Zhou Yu said softly, "The battle of the MX mecha involves a lot of benefits, and it also concerns Dean Lin's reputation in this life. He doesn't want to step down without any dignity, so naturally he won't care about these things. In the end, for you to be able to help Nutshell Mobile force the other into such a blatant ugliness is already very impressive." She glanced at the child in the nanny's arms and lowered her voice to say, "The winner is the king, and the loser is the thief. As long as the result is achieved, not many people care about the process. Right now, for you, the key is to help that little white flower win in the mecha battle the day after tomorrow. The Ministry of National Defense has urgently sent an ace pilot over," Su Le said after a moment's silence, "but the opponent is using Madmanly. That's why I don't understand what the other side is thinking. Although the Lees of Philadelphia have always been known for their neutrality, I believe that if the madam is really willing to help Nutshell Mobile, she will definitely be able to do more. I remember Tai Yuan once said that the old director of the Bureau of Proclamation was a 7th-generation relative of his. I'm not sure about that either." Hearing Madman Lee's name, Zhou Yu's tone became a little more cautious. "Right now, you can only hope that the ace pilot father has chosen for you all is stronger than that secretary of yours. After hanging up the phone, Sulu walked closer to take a look at the mecha that was being modified. The engineers of Nutshell Mobile carried on with their own work with gloomy expressions. They stared at the mechanics of the main assembly base as they changed the firepower system and installed the outer armor sensor equipment without blinking. They had already arrived at the old moon base, but in the end, the opponent had still used underhanded means to take away their test pilot. The engineers of Nutshell Mobile all knew what this meant. Of course, they were worried that these mechanics of the main assembly base would not be too clean. Sulu walked out of the core area warehouse and asked for a cup of green tea in the living area. He leaned against the glass wall and sipped on it. Through the many layers of rigid film, he looked at the desolate but moving surface of the moon outside the base and lit a cigarette. He smoked one cigarette after another until he felt that his lips were a little numb. The smoke made him squint his eyes. Only then did he feel a little better. He remembered what Bai Yulan had said before she was taken away and lightly clenched his fists. A soft synthesized female voice sounded, indicating that there was an external ship landing outside the main assembly base. Sulu did not pay attention to it. President Sieg and the members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff would be watching the mecha battle from afar in the control hall of S1 the day after tomorrow. These 2 days, the spaceships that were taking off and landing at the old moon base were mostly engineers and logisticians. A few minutes later, the sound of footsteps could be heard from the entrance of the underground tunnel leading from the spaceship berth to the base. These footsteps were very steady, as if a group of soldiers were marching forward. Sulu subconsciously turned his head to look, but his line of sight was blocked by the buildings. He could only see that many officers and mechanics in the living area were all walking towards the sound of the footsteps. Their faces were filled with excitement as they stood on both sides of the road. The first to enter his field of vision were the 10 or so professors from the Federal Academy of Science. It was obvious that the sound of these professors' footsteps had been drowned out by the sound of footsteps behind them. Su Li's eyes narrowed. He held his teacup and looked around the corner. Applause rang out first. The soldiers of the old moon base automatically stood in 2 rows to welcome the new arrival. Under the protection of several officers, the youngest lieutenant colonel in the history of the Federation walked out of the corner into the eyes of the applause and burning gazes, and into Su Li's sight. For the Federal Army, the successor of the Lees of Philadelphia was already worthy of such treatment. Moreover, Madman Lee had already proven himself to be a legendary figure in the Federation with his insane battle results on the front lines in the West Woods. Sulu narrowed his eyes and looked over there. He realized that Li Feng was not as arrogant and haughty as he had seen before. The 16-year-old lieutenant colonel was gracefully bowing and thanking the applauding soldiers around him. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Madman Lee was just about to say something when he suddenly felt a gaze on him from behind. It made him feel extremely uncomfortable, so he instinctively turned his head and saw Sulu standing by the wall with a cup of green tea in his hand. Madman Lee narrowed his eyes. A hint of delight flashed across his features, like a tiger in the woods who had seen its most delicious prey. Although he had only participated in the mecha combat test to carry out the orders of the Department of National Defense, being able to defeat the mecha of the Shell Motor Company and make that fellow lose face was truly his greatest motivation. Hundreds of officers and technicians in the living quarters of the old moon base all noticed the gaze of the successor of the Lees of Philadelphia. They were all very curious as to who was worthy of his serious gaze. From the whispers of a few people, the crowd found out that the skinny young man standing by the wall was the technical supervisor of the Shell Motor Company. He was specifically in charge of the maintenance of the new mecha combat test this time. Under countless curious gazes, Li Feng waved his hand to stop the officers behind him from following him. He slowly walked towards Sulu, each step steady and full of awe. Su Li's figure wasn't thin, but compared to Li Feng's body that was filled with strength, he looked a little delicate. He lowered his eyes and looked at the teacup in his hand, as if he had not noticed the arrival of this person. I said before that I would kill you with my own hands, but it's a pity that you don't know how to operate a mecha. Besides, this is a military mission. Even if you are in a mecha, I can't really kill you. Li Feng said seriously, but since I'm here, your Shell Motor Company doesn't have much hope anymore. No matter how bad that purple sea from the Academy of Science is, the outcome will be the same. If such domineering words came out of someone else's mouth, they would only find it ridiculous. However, this person had gone to the front lines to kill enemies at the age of 12, piloting an M52 and slaughtering the Empire's Royal Mecha Battalion. Yet, coming out of his mouth, it sounded so natural. The original pilot was called by Yulon. A few hours ago, he was here. He promised me that he would take care of you. Sulub lowered his head and said, unfortunately, those bastards you're fighting for have robbed him of the chance to take care of you. Invincible in the military. He stared at the teacup and muttered to himself, look at how confident you are. I suddenly want to make a bet with you. Mad Manly looked at him with a strange gaze and said, go ahead. If Shell Motor loses, from now on, I will kneel when I see you and call you invincibly. If you lose, give up the entire universe when you see me and stop bothering me. At the same time, remember to call me uncle. Or you can take down the door sign of the Feiqing Manor and give it to me. As he slowly said these words, Su Lu was still staring at the green tea in his cup, as if he was staring at the ugly faces of many important people in the Federation. Chapter 249. Just like any scene in a play, when two people who had no standpoint and were natural enemies met each other, sparks flew in all directions amidst their calm words. The surrounding extras naturally had to express their rich inner emotions with silence and astonishment at the appropriate time. They were inexplicably surprised by the bet. The population of the Federation was in the billions, and the Federal Army was in the millions. The number of heroes in history was innumerable. No one would have thought that a thin technician would say that he would dismantle the house number of the Lees of Philadelphia in front of the descendant of the god of war. Although Su Lu and Mad Manly did not speak loudly, they did not deliberately avoid the surrounding crowd. The contents of the bet were clearly stated. When it fell into the ears of the crowd, how arrogant and even exaggerated was this? The arrogance of the Lees of Philadelphia had its own historical reasons and the fanatical support of the people of the Federation as its foundation. But what qualifications did this technician have to be arrogant? Su Lu was an arrogant person. His mood was calm and cheerful, like an ancient mirror made of water talc. In front of a gentle person, he would be gentle, and in front of a kind person, he would be kind. Whatever the world gave him, he would give back. When he was young, he always thought that the world was beautiful, so what he showed was a happy smile with his white teeth exposed. Now that he realized that the world was not like that, his expression naturally became a little heavier. When he was in the hospital, he did not want to give in to the wild and violent Mad Manly, not to mention that he was in an extremely bad mood today, so he directly confronted him. This confrontation actually caused Mad Manly to be silent for a long time. The 16-year-old lieutenant colonel of the Federation slowly narrowed his eyes. A hint of cruelty flashed across his youthful face, but he immediately returned to calmness. After confirming that every word Su Lu said was true, he said, there are countless tons of crystal ores under a man's knees. I don't want you to kneel to me. If that little white flower nutshell is crushed this time, I only ask that you never see Zuyu again for the rest of your life. Don't show up in the capital ring again. Get the hell out of here as far as the Federation's warships can. It's settled then. Su Lu placed the teacup on the table and prepared to leave. He didn't want the officers of the old moon base to look at him like he was an idiot. With his hands behind his back, Mad Manly narrowed his eyes as he watched Li Du walk towards the corridor. He suddenly said, perhaps you have your own reasons for being angry. Those old guys at the Academy of Science are really bastards. Sulu stopped, but he didn't turn around. But this has nothing to do with me. I am a soldier of the Federation. I am here to participate in the mecha duel this time because I am following orders from the Ministry of Defense. I will not be angered by this bet. Since you've stayed in a body cultivation hall before, you should be very clear that the Purple Sea's maneuverability can only be displayed in the hands of someone like me. It's best if you tell Nutshell's pilots about these things as soon as possible. Sulu lowered his head slightly. He knew what Mad Manly meant. The two of them had exchanged blows in the Linyuan before. Although it had only been for a split second, they could both feel each other's strength in close-range combat. Mad Manly seemed to have misunderstood him as an unknown expert nurtured by that body cultivation hole. Naturally, he thought that only the two of them knew how terrifying a new generation twin-engine mecha was when a close-range combat expert was piloting it. Hearing Madman Li's words, Sulu suddenly remembered what General Zhou Yingxing had told him before. The army was not allowed to think. The Lees of Philadelphia specialized in nurturing the most standard professional soldiers of the Federation. The 16-year-old Madman Li already had the faint feeling of military god Li Pifu from back in the day. However, he seemed to be more unbridled. This was probably the side effect of youth. However, from these few words, it was obvious that Li Feng was not a lunatic who only knew how to kill. That night, the entire Old Moon base was discussing the arrival of the successor of the Lees of Philadelphia. The legend of military god Li Pifu had gradually faded away. As for the story of the invincible Madman Li, the soldiers stationed at the capital ring had only heard of it from their comrades who had retired from the front lines. Piloting an M52 and facing off against a team of soldiers from the Imperial Royal Mecha Battalion, what kind of level was this? The thought of being able to see the operation of those mechas with their own eyes in a few dozen hours made everyone excited. In the central area of the base, the warehouse allocated to the Shell Motor Company was shrouded in a low pressure. The mixed air provided by the life support system made the technicians feel a little strange. In fact, they knew very well that this strange feeling came entirely from the gradual loss of confidence. The pilot of the Purple Sea Mecha was Madman Li. The higher the reputation of this young lieutenant colonel in the military, the more helpless the technicians of the Shell Company felt. This was especially so after the Magnolia, who was chosen first, was taken away by the Bureau of Proclamation. The CEO of the Shell Company was still angrily negotiating with the government, but time was running out. That night, at 11 o'clock, another spaceship arrived at the Old Moon base from planet S1. The reserve pilot, accompanied by a team of soldiers and board members of the company, walked into the warehouse. If even this reserve pilot was taken away by the other party's tricks, the Shell Motor Company would most likely report the whole incident to the media and have a war with the government. In the dead of the night, all the technicians returned to their own rooms anxiously. The modification of the mecha program in the base had been completed. No problems were found, but they still felt a little uneasy. Sulu sat on the box under the pure white MX mecha. He chewed on the bread in his hand and mumbled, "I really didn't expect the reserve pilot to be you." Zhou Yu slowly chewed on the bread and smiled. "Who else can you find at the last minute? Other than that secretary of yours, I'm the most familiar with MX. This ace student of the First Military College's mecha department was already drenched in sweat. Previously, he had cooperated with the technical team to perform the hot start and basic operations, which had used up some of his energy. He looked at the lonely Sulu and his heart skipped a beat. He tried to be as gentle as possible. "I know Secretary Bai is the pilot you've been secretly preparing for several months, but since the other party has used such a dirty trick, there's no other way. Now, you can only trust me and support me." Sulu did not believe Zhou Yu's ability, which was praised by the entire First Military College. However, He always thought that a pilot had to have gone through real battles before to know the taste of death and blood. Only then could the MX's super maneuverability be displayed in a swift and fierce manner. Looking at the sweaty Zhou, Sulu suddenly felt that life was really strange. The first time he had piloted a mecha in battle was this officer beside him. And now, he had to snatch the control rights of Little White Flower from the other's hands. Zhou did not notice Su Li's intentions. He only comforted him. Major Lan Xiaolong, who was in charge of protecting you, also knew that White Magnolia was arrested. He notified the military officer of 8,384, so you don't have to worry. Speaking of which, they're all from the 17th Armored Division. If the war god's own people were treated unfairly like this, he would definitely speak up. The military has always been very protective of its own people, but it's too late. He continued, this time, the mecha battle standard was actually decided by the war god. Lieutenant Colonel Li Feng was conscripted by the Academy of Science. This is a kind of balance. Otherwise, anyone could see that Fei Qing was on Nutshell's side. Do you know about cultivation centers? Su Lu suddenly asked. There aren't many left in the capital ring. There are still some in Bermuda, Zhou replied. After a moment of silence, Su Lu said, how confident are you against Madman Li? How would you know if you don't fight? Zhou closed his eyes. When the time comes, I'll go. Su Lu didn't explain anything else and said very naturally. Zhou stared at him in shock. For a long time, he was speechless. Outside the capital special district, the heavily guarded all-weather command hall of the Ministry of National Defense was already packed with people even though it was still early in the morning. The three large holographic screens in front of the hall were performing signal synchronization. Below them, countless workstations were busily performing calculations. The citizens of the Federation didn't know that in this building, a very important matter was about to be decided today. The staff in the hall had a solemn expression on their faces. The Federal Academy of Science and the Shell Motor Company each took up a large work area in the two corners of the hall. The middle area was reserved for the technical officers of the Ministry of National Defense. Behind these staff, on several rows of comfortable seats, there were already more than 20 important people in military uniforms or civilian clothes. These people could basically decide many things in the Federation, but today, they could only watch the result and then passively announce the conclusion based on this result. The director of the Federal Academy of Science, Lin Yuanhu, sat in the middle of these important people. His aged face was calm. The generals and officials beside him couldn't tell if he was feeling anxious or not. As a leading figure in the academic world of the Federation, he had too many connections, supporters, and admirers in the political world. This was why so many people stood firmly behind the Academy of Science, cheering for him and helping him handle many things that he didn't want to handle personally. Looking at the battle environment of the Old Moon polar region that was gradually becoming clearer on the holographic screen, Lin Yuanhu narrowed his eyes slightly. He thought that once this was over, it was time for him to retire. Using a new generation of mecha as a closing song was a good choice. The feedback last night said that the ace pilot that had been secretly trained by the Shell Company for 100 days had been brought back by the Bureau of Proclamation. Lieutenant Colonel Li Feng had also started experimenting with the mecha. It seemed that there was nothing else to worry about. Below, in the Shell Motor Company's work area, Shang Qiu took off her glasses and rubbed her forehead. Looking at the technical data on the screen, she felt a headache coming on. She subconsciously turned to look at Lin Yuanhu, who was in the stands. She habitually scratched her itchy hair with the tip of her pen. She wondered if Zhou would be able to force the Purple Sea into overclocking mode for 3 minutes in a mecha battle. A large military nearland spaceship landed in the Old Moon polar region of the Khaki Mountains. This region above latitude was under the direct rays of the stars all year round. The temperature was extremely high, and the terrain was extremely complex. Choosing this mountain range as the training ground for the Federation's new mecha would allow them to truly judge the combat capabilities and overall maintenance standards of the mecha from both sides. The back of the Old Moon was the base of the Federal Fleet. There was also a subsidiary base near the Khaki Mountains. 2 new mecha that carried the future of the Federal Army's new mecha were currently in the base making the final preparations for battle testing. All the technical staff had already left. The CEO of the shell company patted Zhou Yu's shoulder with a serious expression and said, "During your graduation exam, you defeated an instructor from the 1st Academy's mecha department within 1 minute. That was an ace pilot who had won the Purple Merit Medal, so you must have confidence in yourself." A complicated expression flashed across Zhou Yu's eyes. He said softly, "Please don't worry." After the CEO left, only Zhou Yu and Su Lo were left in this area of the base. As the technical supervisor of the mecha, Su Lo still had to finalize some final parameters and set up the monitoring authority. In the eerily quiet environment, Zhou Yu glanced at the white MX mecha that was 7 meters tall in front of him and suddenly asked, "Do you have confidence?" This was the question Su Lo had asked him the night before. Zhou Yu really wanted to know how he would answer. Su Lo closed the control panel on the ground and said calmly, "Against Mad Manly, I don't have the slightest bit of confidence." After a moment of silence, he added, "But I have the determination." Zhou Yu looked at the back of the figure that was dragging the heavy black box and climbing up the mecha. Suddenly, he said loudly, "You really are a lunatic. I can't believe I actually agreed to let you go. I'm also a lunatic. Don't forget, the person we're going to face today is a lunatic." Su Lo did not turn his head as he replied loudly. Zhou Yu had come from the West Woods to the capital to study. Along the way, he had been branded with the mark of excellence. Thus, he had become increasingly steady and gentle, never making a single mistake. Until the night before, when he had heard Su Li's request, he had discovered that he could occasionally go a little crazy. Watching Su Lo crawl into the cockpit, he suddenly felt that this kind of craziness might be exchanged for a very good result. After all, this fellow's talent in the field of mecha was indeed very frightening. Closing the cockpit door and opening the black box, he took out the simulation system and installed it. Then, he connected the cable to the MX Mecha's standard interface. This was originally a data channel that Shang Qiu had reserved for him at his suggestion during the final design phase. The warm-up of the mecha had long been completed. Su Lo quietly looked at the feedback of the mecha's data from his helmet. Feeling the slight numbness on his skin, he gently pressed down on the red button. According to the privacy regulations of the First Charter, a pilot's personal operation data could be kept confidential. For the ace pilots of the military, those skills that were exclusive to them were things that they had exchanged for with their lives. Unless the military conscripted them, no one could even dream of spying on their operations. Even the command hall watching from hundreds of thousands of kilometers away was no exception. Thus, Su Lo was not worried that his use of the simulation system would be discovered by others. In fact, this was also one of the things he relied on to participate in the mecha battle and face Mad Manly head-on. Perhaps someone would detect something from the way he operated the mecha and bring him some unknown danger, but he already did not care. Almost at the same time, in the underground base of the Khaki Mountains, in the Old Moon Assembly Base, in the S1 Capital Command Hall, the sound of an electronic countdown rang out. 10, 9, 8, 7. Su Lo calmly listened to the electronic countdown. His left hand was on the control stick, and his right hand was on the touchscreen. This idea of mixing two control methods was probably only an unconventional engineer like him would dare to try. As the last chime rang out, the lights below the base dimmed for a moment. The sound of air leakage whistled, but it could not reach the inside of the mecha. The alloy hatch at the top of the base took 2 seconds to open. The load-bearing lift platform below slowly transported the heavy white MX mecha to the surface of the moon. The vision of reality merged with the light green capture system and appeared in the window of the helmet. Su-Lo narrowed his eyes. As far as the eye could see, he could only see light all around him. The windless and dust-free Kaki Mountains were bathed in the blazing light. It was a scene of tranquility and danger. The central control computer of the MX Mecha had already issued a warning. A vacuum environment was a very severe test for the life support system. Fortunately, the MX Mecha had considered this point when it was designed for combat. Even if the exterior of the mecha was damaged, the internal cockpit could still ensure an independent life support system. It was just that it could not be maintained for too long. Beep 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 beep. A series of sharp alarms rang out. In the field of vision where the light was the brightest, a light purple mecha suddenly appeared. Under the blazing light, the two newest MX mecha of the Federation in the Kaki Mountains appeared even more holy in their white reflections, while the purple appeared even more demonic and murderous. After the two mecha had been transported out of the base, the distance between them was only 200 meters. For a cheetah, it would only take a few breaths to reach its prey. However, for a new mecha with dual-engine technology and 4 times the power output, this distance was actually a little frighteningly short. The Purple Sea mecha moved, its dual engines at full power. One moment it was still far away, the next it had already turned into a purple shadow and was charging over. The instant the little white flower mecha set foot on the surface of the moon, Su-Lo, who was completely focused, had discovered the figure of the purple mecha standing proudly in the light before the onboard radar. Being able to see it with the naked eye was naturally more direct than being able to see it with the radar. However, he had not expected that Mad Manly, operating the Purple Sea mecha, would make his moves so swiftly and valiantly. In fact, he had not even chosen to attack with long-range weapons right from the start, instead intending to engage in close-range mecha combat at close range. The right arm of the white mecha had long been raised horizontally, and the hanging weapons mounted on the side of the mecha's arm began to spew wildly. However, the firepower systems of both mecha had already been modified by the final assembly base into low-light marking weapons used in training exercises. In addition, there was no air on the surface of the moon, so it was very difficult to hear those crisp and beautiful clicking sounds. However, at the same time that the little white flower mecha launched its long-range attack, the Purple Sea mecha, which was charging forward at unparalleled speed, made a preemptive judgment. Its heavy mechanical legs stomped viciously on a protruding moon rock, and the mecha's body moved in an extremely strange and powerful manner as it forcefully turned to avoid those beams of light that represented lethality, preventing the sensors on the mecha's body from receiving any signal of damage. In just an instant, the Purple Sea mecha had already broken through the blockade of long-range firepower and arrived in front of Su-Lo. Without hesitation, it silently and coldly used its hard alloy fists to punch towards the abdomen of the little white flower mecha. The massive inertia of the heavy mecha, the strong initial startup speed of the twin engines, and the evasive maneuverability under quadruple power were all used to their fullest by Mad Manly, who was operating the Purple Sea mecha. Using the simplest of movements, it created the most dangerous moment. The Purple Sea mecha's advance had left behind a trail of light dust on the moon rock, but before it could even touch the purple surface of the mecha, the killing blow had arrived in an instant. A moment later, a cloud of dust had descended. Near the Kaki Mountains, countless data collectors had been installed. The mecha of both sides also had monitoring equipment installed by the final assembly base. In addition, there were 7 highly sensitive satellites positioned above the polar regions of the old moon. These equipment faithfully transmitted everything that happened on the battlefield back to the conference room at the old moon base, as well as to the command hall on Planet S1 hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. The instant the electronic countdown ended, everyone in the command hall fell silent for a moment. They stared at the 2 new mechas standing 200 meters apart on the giant screen. No one spoke, not even making a sound. No matter which side the technicians in the command hall belonged to, no matter which side those big shots watching the battle supported, at least in this moment, they all had the same feeling. No matter what standard the Federation adopted for the new mecha, and no matter what the competing interests behind the scenes were, at least they were very honored to be able to witness the first real battle of the Federation's epic-making new mecha. The light on the screen was very intense, but the white and purple of the two mechas' exterior appeared even more intense due to the reflection of the light. The people in the command hall stared unblinkingly at the screen. Only after a moment did those technicians come to their senses and prepare to begin data collection. This was the first real battle of the new MX mecha. The technical parameters displayed by both sides in this battle would not only serve as a judgment for any possible disputes, but more importantly, this was a good opportunity for the Federation to collect data on the mecha. However, the technicians did not have time to do the work of data collection, nor did they have time to use the data to analyze the operating efficiency of the MX mecha's three major systems in a vacuum environment. Thus, they could only turn their gazes back to the screen. Because the purple sea mecha had moved, and the moment it moved with such power that it could swallow mountains and rivers, full of dominance. Its speed was unimaginably fast. The Federation had been developing mecha for many years. Mecha were renowned for their high mobility, but no one had ever imagined that on the craggy surface environment of the old moon, a mecha could actually display such terrifying speed. This sort of instantaneous activation speed and the wondrous acceleration that followed, could it be the change brought about by the twin engines? Everyone was aware of this point, but no one had time to sigh. Because everything had happened too quickly, the roar of the purple sea mecha's twin engines could not be collected. However, the people in the command hall felt as if they were on the old moon, watching the purple sea mecha roar away with their own eyes, as fast as lightning. Using this sort of speed to display a revolutionary breakthrough in mecha development. Shang Qiu stared wide-eyed and slack-jawed at the purple mecha charging forward at high speed on the screen, her hands gripping her pen tightly. As a key figure in the formation of dual-engine technology, she knew better than anyone else just what kind of speed a mecha could reach when the dual-engine technology was operating at full power. However, that was just data from the laboratory, tests under a simulated environment. Today, seeing the dual-engine mecha in action for real, she was still so shocked that she could not find words to describe it. Speed. The only thing that determined a mecha's performance and close combat power could only be speed. On the screen, the white mecha tried to use long-range firepower to seal off the path of the purple mecha. However, in the face of the terrifying speed of the purple sea mecha and the valiant operation of the pilot, the few weak beams of light that represented the firing line appeared so futile and weak. This was the frightening part of the new twin-engine mecha. Under the protection of supermobility, the inherent firepower system of the universe was already outdated. If the firing speed of mechanical weapons and the tracking speed of standard missiles could no longer match the instantaneous evasive speed of the mecha, then how could they injure or destroy it? The high-speed movement of the purple sea mecha on the holographic screen, leaving behind only an afterimage, made clear to everyone in the Old Moon Base's conference room and command hall a fact. In future battles, unless it was a concentrated firepower or a precise beam attack from a battleship, the MX mecha would be a superweapon that would be very difficult to surround or defeat. The instinctive excitement of an engineer flashed through Shang Qiu's mind. She stared blankly at the screen. Her fingers had not yet finished exerting force when she saw the purple sea mecha charging in front of Little White Flower. She was very worried whether the Nutshell MX mecha would be defeated by this attack. But what shocked her even more was that the pilot controlling the Purple Sea had only used 2 days and 2 nights to master the control system of the twin-engine mecha to such perfection. He had completely taken advantage of the speed advantage of the new MX mecha, abandoning the original federal military mecha movements to pursue close combat instead of long-range attacks. The Lees of Philadelphia were indeed geniuses on the battlefield. Only a genius mecha warrior would dare to completely abandon the original mecha control method in his first real battle and rely on his instincts to change his battle strategy at the last minute to maximize the mobility of the twin-engine mecha. This choice undoubtedly proved that the crazy person in the Purple Sea mecha had extraordinary calmness and strong confidence in himself. The officers and technicians in the command hall who were watching the screen stared dumbfoundedly at the brilliant purple light. Looking at the speed of the mecha that the Federation had never produced before, they did not have time to react. They did not have time to analyze any data before they subconsciously made a judgment. The battle between the two MX mecha seemed to have just started and was about to end. The military bigwigs behind the command hall who stood up after being shocked by the speed of the Purple Sea mecha were also thinking the same thing. Even if the nutshell pilot was the best ace pilot in the federal military, in the face of the violent and swift attacks of the Purple Sea mecha, he would definitely not be able to make the most correct response. The white mecha that was obviously still defending against long-range attacks and close combat would be like its codename Little White Flower in the next moment, swaying and shattering in the vacuum of Old Moon Mount Kaki. The strong mechanical arm took up a quarter of the field of vision. The glossy purple exterior reflected the light of the stars. The fiercely contracting joint components and transmission pipes were so clear and were getting bigger and bigger. Sulu had always thought that Mad Manly had only been in contact with the MX mecha for 2 days and could not be more familiar with it than himself. But seeing this scene, he knew that he was wrong. Under such circumstances, even the fastest reaction speed of a federal military pilot would not be able to allow Little White Flower to make the correct response. But he could, because his nerves were thicker than others, and his reaction was faster than others. In the dark cockpit, his fingers quickly swept across the screen, and at the same time, the warm energy in his body also burst forth in an instant. Through the simulation system on his body, it sent precise signals to every component of the mecha. The alloy fist of the Purple Sea mecha was enough to defeat the enemy in one hit. With the huge force and high speed of the sprint, it seemed impossible to dodge. So Little White Flower did not dodge. Instead, at the moment when the alloy fist was about to hit its body, its left mechanical leg stepped back and its right mechanical arm struck out as fast as lightning. In a vacuum environment, the alloy fist of the Purple Sea mecha could not make the sound of air exploding. But that fist that broke through the air and landed in the eyes of everyone watching the foot of Mount Kaki, was mixed with endless dominance and murderous intent. Little White Flower's mecha moved, but its movement was hurried and helpless. As if it had been blown by a strong wind, its waist twisted slightly. But it was this seemingly helpless twist that the Purple Sea mecha's fist, which had been charging up for a long time, brushed past the left side of the white mecha's chest and collided directly with that mechanical arm that had appeared out of nowhere. The two strong alloy fists collided heavily. In this instant, it seemed that the hard alloy surface could be seen slowly deforming under this impact, revealing the complex internal components. When the mecha collided, there was no sound. This scene fell into everyone's eyes like a clap of thunder, waking everyone up. Non-standard movements. In the ground command hall, the invited dean of the 1st Military Academy's mobility department leaned on the railing, his eyes narrowed as he watched the two mecha collide for the first time on the holographic screen. He said in a low voice, "All non-standard movements." No one paid attention to what he was saying. Everyone was staring at the holographic screen, dumbfounded. If it was said that Lieutenant Colonel Li Feng, who was piloting the Purple Sea mecha, was able to use the new MX mecha's functions to the maximum in a short period of time because of his identity as the descendant of the war god, this was an amazing but acceptable feat. But the pilot sent by the Nutshell Company to operate the white mecha was actually able to make an effective response in such a short period of time. Although it was a bit embarrassing, it had successfully blocked the Purple Sea mecha's domineering attack. This made everyone unable to believe their own eyes. How fast is the hand speed required to do this? Most of the people in the command hall were professionals. Although they had not personally operated the new mecha, they knew that under the Purple Sea mecha's domineering attack, the reaction time left for the white mecha pilot was very short. To be able to continuously input commands to operate the mecha to make the only feasible response in such a short period of time, what kind of hand speed and vision did this require? Chapter 250. When the federal military operated the M-series mecha, they had always strictly adhered to military mecha operating regulations. This was because the cruel reality of the battlefield had long proven that any tactical maneuvers that went beyond the regulations could only become a flashy dance of death in battle. Military mecha were tall and heavy metal existences. They resembled humans, but could not be real humans. To control this giant battle machine through those complicated circuitry components, those cumbersome regulations were precisely the most efficient method. In the command hall, the head of the First Academy's mobility department stared blankly at the screen. This was because he knew very well that from the high-speed start of the Purple Sea mecha to the unbelievable hand speed of the Little White Flower mecha, whether it was the way it moved or the combat techniques, the mecha operating methods of the two pilots were completely different from what he had been taught for decades. Twin engines, 4 times the power, and unprecedented mobility made the new MX mecha a brand new existence. He had already thought beforehand that the operation of the new mecha would definitely change, but he had not expected that it would require a brand new operating method to be able to unleash the power of this new mecha. War Godly Pifu had once single-handedly killed his way into enemy lines, using an old M-series mecha to kill the Emperor of the Empire, and then retreated bathed in blood. In fact, many people in the military knew that the War God's mecha operating methods were definitely different from those of the so-called ace pilots. However, this method could not be learned, and it could not be used on the old M-series mecha. Until today, when the new mecha battled, a brand new world appeared before everyone's eyes. The people in the command hall vaguely caught something, but it was not clear enough. Only the head of the mobility department had thought of this point first. From now on, the federal military would have to train a new batch of pilots. A revolutionary mecha would require revolutionary operating methods. The fact that the white mecha from Nutshell Company had actually survived a fierce attack from the Purple Sea mecha shocked everyone in the command hall. Everyone felt a trace of admiration for the pilot in the white mecha. Shang Qiu looked at the white mecha on the screen in confusion. Suddenly, she felt that this incomparably familiar MX mecha had actually become somewhat unfamiliar. She knew that it should be Zhou Yu inside the mecha, but the problem was that she had worked with Zhou Yu for a long time. She knew very well that this gentle and elegant man's mecha operating style was definitely not this silent. Yes, silent was used to describe his style. It meant that he was so calm that he did not care about anything. At the foot of Old Moon Khaki Mountain Range, there was a cloud of dust. 2 MX mecha were fighting at high speed. The speed of the mecha was so fast that it was hard to see clearly in the cloud of dust. In the vacuum environment, it was quiet, and there were no sounds of collisions. Only the occasional sparks and tremors of the earth could be heard. The 3 fingers on Su Li's left hand quickly pressed on the accelerator button, feeling the intense vibrations of the mecha. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the screen in his helmet, continuously controlling the mecha through the touchscreen input and simulation system, dodging wave after wave of attacks from the Purple Sea, each stronger than the last. Only after direct contact did he realize how terrifying the Purple Sea mecha that Mad Manly was piloting was. The mobility of the new dual-engine mecha had been pushed to the limit by that person. From the moment they met, the other had not given him any chance to catch his breath. His alloy fists were laced with a heroic aura, smashing through every weak spot of his mecha from tricky paths. If he had not performed above his usual standards at the very beginning, the Little White Flower mecha would probably have long been struck down by the Purple Sea, only to be humiliated by the other. The battle between the 2 new mecha was in reality no longer the mecha battle mode of the past. Instead, it was more like a close combat battle between military experts. It was also like those Jianghu disciples wielding large swords in the dark of the night, filled with a bloody and direct style. The problem was that the Purple Sea piloted by Mad Manly was perfectly displaying the speed of the new mecha. Using standard and perfect tactical movements, he made absolutely non-standard continuous attacks, striking out with the force of a great river, surging without rest, clean and efficient, open and closed, incomparably heroic, its domineering aura filled with a crazed air. Faced with such a terrifying purple mecha, the white mecha at the foot of the mountain was completely at a disadvantage after luckily escaping the first wave of attacks. There was no room for retaliation at all. He was no match for Mad Manly. At this moment, Sulu recalled what Bai Yulan had once said to him in the underground base. If you encounter Mad Manly in a mecha, you had best avoid him as soon as possible. In the past, he had not understood this saying very well, but at this moment, watching the purple mecha's intimidating and oppressive attacks under the illumination of the screen, he finally understood more. This 16-year-old lieutenant colonel of the Federation seemed to be a person born for mecha combat, and the new dual-engine mecha seemed to be a combat tool designed for people like him. In just 2 days and 2 nights, Mad Manly had already become one with that purple mecha. His control was perfect, clean and swift. He dodged and weaved in and out of the way like a gust of wind, making people feel suffocated. The alloy fist scraped across the surface of the mecha, leaving a deep gash. The sharp armor-piercing blade extended from the spherical joint and slashed towards the left side of the white mecha, where the central control chip was located. The white mecha twisted its body forcefully in this desperate situation, its 2 thick mechanical legs moving in standard steps as it retreated backwards. Sparks sprang up on the surface of the mecha, and then were quickly extinguished in the oxygen-free environment like a string of shooting stars. The close-range weapons of the mecha blocked each other, and from time to time, terrible cracks appeared on the hard alloy surface. From the looks of it, the Purple Sea mecha had already gained an overwhelming advantage. However, what was strange was that every time the Purple Sea mecha was about to hit a vital point, the white mecha seemed to be able to predict where the Purple Sea mecha's next attack would come from and dodge in advance. From the start of the battle until now, it had actually only been less than 30 seconds, but the Purple Sea mecha had already completed countless dazzling non-standard mecha combat moves, causing great damage to the white mecha's body. However, the white mecha had still not been knocked down. Whether it was the people watching the battle in the command hall or the aloofly Fong controlling the Purple Sea mecha himself, all of them felt a sliver of doubt towards the situation. Who was the pilot of the nutshell mecha? How was he able to withstand the violent and high-speed attacks of the descendant of the Face City god of war under such circumstances? The exterior of the little white flower mecha was full of scars, and occasionally, black liquid would spurt out. It looked like it was in a mess, but it did not suffer any fatal attacks. It fought and retreated at the foot of Cocky Mountain, and it seemed to be able to keep up with the operating speed of the Purple Sea mecha. The data sent back to the command hall also proved this point. Although the hand speed of the pilot could not reach the explosive speed at the very beginning, it was still amazingly fast. However, if the battle continued like this, the mecha that was swaying like a white flower under the barren hills of Old Moon would not be able to hold on for long. Defeat seemed to be a foregone conclusion. The people in the Old Moon base and the command hall could not hear anything, but they could see these shocking scenes. The 2 young people who were in the mecha could clearly feel every vibration of the mecha, and every damage. Right then, all of Su Li's mind and willpower were focused on operating the mecha. The scorching lines on his body raced at high speed, helping him to push the white mecha's speed to the maximum through the simulation system. Only then could he fully utilize the full power of the little white flower's twin engines. Even so, facing the wild attacks of the Purple Sea mecha, he still felt as if there was a huge wave crashing towards him, as if it could drown him at any time. He did not know what level of hand speed the simulation system he was using was equivalent to among the Federation pilots. He also did not know that the white mecha he was controlling was not a standard action. He could only follow his own instincts to capture the traces of the purple sea mecha's violent and frightening attacks, controlling the white mecha to follow the 10 stances he was most familiar with. In Section H1 of Lihua University's library, he had conducted many Level 6 mecha training exercises alone. Later on, he had also followed by Yulan to learn the standard federal military tactical movements. But in this moment, in front of Madman Li's mecha, he had forgotten all of this. He had to forget. He could only follow the moves he was most familiar with, turning the little white flower's mecha into his own. Bent elbows, thrust knees, parry horizontally, advance. Heroism against heroism. Plus, for some reason, Sulu felt that the combat moves of the purple sea mecha were somewhat familiar. It was as if he had been born knowing where the opponent would attack from. That was why the white mecha he was controlling was able to hold on bitterly under the opponent's violent attacks. In this instant, he suddenly understood that if it had been anyone else, such as Bai Yulan or Zhou Yu, they would probably not have been able to cope under the terrifying attacks of Madman Li and the dual-engine mecha combined into one. That purple sea mecha gave people the feeling that it was undefeatable. But Su Lo remained calm. He steadily and quickly entered the commands, adjusting the signals emitted by his body so that every move of the little white flower's mecha would become more accurate and powerful. Uncle Feng Yu admired Su Li's calmness the most. This admiration was even greater than his admiration for Su Li's mechanical engineering talent. This young man, Su Lu, seemed to have been born with a rock. No matter what kind of difficult situation he was in, he would always maintain a clear train of thought. The twin engines of the purple sea mecha provided great power. Under the khaki mountains, the mecha twisted its body abruptly and avoided the little white flower's block. In an instant, it had advanced behind little white flower and smashed its alloy fists towards the defenseless head of the mecha. The head of the mecha was equipped with sophisticated information acquisition equipment, a fire control radar, and a balancing device. If it was subjected to such a violent attack, the moment these equipment failed, the outcome of the battle was obvious. The purple sea mecha's twist and step had been so clean and efficient that there had been no sloppiness. Moreover, it had completely controlled the reaction of the white mecha at that moment. In terms of timing, the battle-hardened Madman Li in the cockpit of the Purple Sea was clearly of the highest standard in the Federal Army. The situation had reached its most critical moment. This is the moment. At the same time that the onboard computer gave the location warning signal, or even a few tenths of a second earlier, Sulu had already made his move. The white mecha's block action had not been completed. 3 power units were simultaneously output, and the joint engine of the left mechanical leg was forcibly shut down. The hydraulic system completed a cold compression in an instant, and because of this extremely complex action, the entire mecha lurched to the left. The purple sea mecha's fist brushed past the white mecha's head and smashed heavily into the left shoulder of the white mecha. The white mecha's shoulder armor instantly tilted up and splashed. The tremendous force of the impact caused the white mecha to fall to the left. But it did not fall. This was because the left arm of the white mech had already reacted in advance, supporting the heavily weathered surface of the moon. Using this tremendous force, the huge body of the white mech began to spin in the air. The heavy mechanical leg drew an arc in the air, then bounced back with incomparable speed, violently smashing into the head of the purple sea mech. This was the first time since the start of the battle that Little White Flower had truly struck the vital point of the purple sea mecha. The command hall, the head of the maneuver department of No. 1 Hospital had just sat down with a complicated expression when he saw this scene on the huge holographic screen. He stood up abruptly and stared in disbelief at the action of Little White Flower's mecha on the holographic screen. Mechanical arm propped up on the ground, mechanical leg rebounded and struck directly at the vital point of the opponent's mecha. Was this something that a mecha could do? This was more like the close combat techniques of the strong people in the body cultivation halls. The pilots of the federal military might have done this kind of action on a normal day, but in a real mecha battle, which mecha would dare to do this kind of action in an extremely short period of time? Only the superpower of the twin engines could ensure that a heavy mecha could carry out such a nimble attack. The head of the department stared in shock at the white mecha's sharp attack in mid-air on the holographic screen. Before he had time to sigh with emotion, he found that today's battle between the new mecha had once again given him a shock in terms of concept. At the same time that little white flower's flying kick struck the Purple Sea's head, the Purple Sea mecha's twin engines activated at full speed and actually reacted at the same time. There was no time to retract the alloy fish that had struck out, but the Purple Sea mecha's mechanical leg bent at the same time. Relying on the power provided by the jet stream, it slid through the air, and the hard joints of the mechanical leg struck the white mecha's abdomen viciously. The Purple Sea mecha charged forward violently, and the white mecha kicked back sharply. The moment the two sides came into contact, a huge force was unleashed at the same time, and both sides were sent flying back more than 20 meters. The heavily weathered surface of the moon was thrown into a cloud of dust by this attack, and it did not settle for a long time. The upper half of the Purple Sea mecha was severely damaged, and there was a terrible crack. Not far away, the white mecha was even more damaged. The outer armor structure of its abdomen was clearly deformed. The two mecha stood tens of meters apart, and in the middle of the moon's surface, the deep imprint of a mechanical palm was very obvious. Chapter 251. Machine Number 1, Kinetic Energy Output Normal. Engine Auxiliary Computer Parameters Normal, Fire Control Radar Ineffective. Information Capture System 46% Delay. Main Firepower System Energy Transfer Complete. Machine Number 2, Energy Input System Damaged, Degree Unknown. Onboard computer has abnormal parameters. Belly engine room damaged, leakage situation occurring. Main Firepower System Energy Transfer Complete. The battle of the new MX mecha on Old Moon had been going on for so long, but the computer system in the command hall had only just finished analyzing the data for the first time. It wasn't that Madman Li and Su Lu, who were piloting the mecha, had already made the dual-engine mecha's battle speed exceed the computer's calculation range. It was just that the battle situation had been so intense that the people in the command hall simply had no time to deal with these things. Machine Number 1 was the Purple Sea developed by the Federal Academy of Science. Machine Number 2 was the Little White Flower developed by the Shell Motor Company. Hearing the electronically synthesized female voice report the damage of both sides, the people in the command hall each had a different expression. The previous battle had already shown that in a face-to-face battle with the new mecha, the long-range weapon system could no longer be used to its full potential. Therefore, whether it was Li Feng operating the Purple Sea or Su Lu operating the Little White Flower, they had all transferred the backup energy of the main firepower system to the mobility aspect at the first opportunity. The decisive choice of the two pilots under Mount Kaki, as well as the courage, confidence, and decisiveness contained in this choice, made the professionals in the command hall feel an unnatural chill. Starting acceleration data, MDX control efficiency parameters, joint engine platinum clutch spacing, following the appearance of various numerical units, the battle data of the new MX mecha hundreds of thousands of kilometers away was transmitted back to the command hall of Planet S1 through the first level of the electronic monitoring network. One only needed to perform a simple comparison of data to discover that the Purple Sea mecha developed by the Federation's Academy of Sciences had an overall advantage, especially in terms of the power output of the main twin engines, which had an overflow value of close to 10%. In a mecha battle, such a large difference in power output was enough to determine victory and defeat. In the right half of the command hall, the Academy of Science experts had calm and confident expressions. The technicians of the Shell Motor Company on the left looked at the data flashing below the giant holographic screen. Their expressions were somewhat grave. The Purple Sea mecha had the advantage in terms of performance, and it was obvious that although the pilot piloting the Little White Flower mecha was also very capable, under Madman Lee's ferocious attacks, he still paled in comparison. With the two added together, the people in the command hall all thought that the Purple Sea mecha from the Academy of Sciences would win. The head of the maneuver department of No. 1 Hospital pulled up the visual data of the pilot's control. Looking at the data of the two pilots' hand speed on the screen, his pupils could not help but shrink. It was understandable that Li Feng, who was controlling the Purple Sea, could reach such a frightening hand speed. Who knew which ace pilot the Nutshell Company had poached from the military? His hand speed was also frightening. Just as the people in the command hall found the rare time to analyze the mecha data of both sides, the image on the giant screen changed once more. The Purple Sea mecha seemed to not know fatigue at all, and did not care about the damage to its head. After pausing for a moment on the spot, it turned into a beautiful purple light and stepped on the soft surface of the moon, rushing towards the Little White Flower. The white mecha was like a fragile flower. There were already many cracks on its exterior. Facing the Purple Sea's attack again, this mecha made a response that no one had expected. Under the blazing light, the Little White Flower mecha's two engines were fully activated. In an instant, it reached the peak of 4 times its original power. 2 smooth auxiliary flying wings slid out from the back of the mecha's waist. As the small jets under the auxiliary flying wings spat out air, the white mecha's figure shook violently. Following the surface of the weathered surface, it quickly flashed towards the back. With the help of the auxiliary flying wings, the MX mecha from the Nutshell Company displayed its highest speed for the first time. It was as if a gust of wind had blown past it, instantly disappearing into the large shadow behind it. That was the shadow of the Kachi mountain range. On the other side, the Purple Sea mecha was still in mid-air, executing an extremely fierce mecha attack maneuver. However, in response to the sudden change in the white mecha, the Purple Sea mecha spread out its auxiliary flying wings and glided down from a height of 10 meters in the air. Using the momentum, the Purple Sea mecha forcefully accelerated, and just as it was about to land on the ground, the Purple Sea mecha changed the direction of its descent to smoothly chase after that patch of shadows. Little White Flower and Purple Sea, one in front and one behind, were like 2 shooting stars traversing the vast universe. They flashed across the screen and disappeared without a trace. The comprehensive surveillance system only took 0.17 seconds to capture the 2 MX mecha's figures. The high-sensitivity satellite above the polar region of the Old Moon was faithfully watching the 2 mecha moving quickly in the shadows of the Kachi mountain range. These images were transmitted to the eyes of the spectators. Today's MX mecha battle test had greatly stimulated the spectators in the command hall of the Old Moon base. For those military representatives who had been immersed in mecha piloting for decades, the way the Purple Sea mecha operated and the strange movements of Little White Flower's mecha as it dodged were the source of their shock. For those mechanics experts and engineers, the performance of these 2 new MX mecha was the real reason why they were dumbfounded. Especially when the 2 mecha, one in front and one behind, extended their auxiliary flying wings at almost the same time, instantly raising the speed of the mecha to a level never before seen in the Federation mecha. Everyone gasped in surprise. The experts from the Shell Motor Company and the Federal Academy of Science had long simulated and even seen with their own eyes how terrifying the absolute speed of the MX mecha was with the assistance of the auxiliary flying wings. But today, witnessing with their own eyes the appearance of this kind of speed in the distant Old Moon base, they still found it hard to contain their excitement. After the excitement, there was a natural round of applause. Everyone on and off the stage stood up and began to clap, moved and proud by the revolutionary breakthrough of the Federation mecha. On the huge widescreen screen, the 2 mecha were operating at full power, switching from combat mode to running mode. They were running at full speed through the rugged Old Moon mountain range without any footholds. This scene was filled with a thrilling sense of beauty. And in sync with the tense atmosphere on the screen, the various data being fed back to the command hall also began to rise again. CLK is moving up in a curve. CLS is approaching its peak. ADS adaptive suspension entering a passive wear and tear period. Not everyone in the command hall could understand these technical terms, but those important figures heard the electronic synchronized sound become more hurried. Their hearts also became nervous. Looking at the graphical color bar graph on one side of the large screen, they knew that the power output of the 2MX mecha on Kachi Mountain was getting higher and higher, almost reaching its limit. Another 2 minutes passed. The data fed back to the ground clearly showed that the power output of the 2 mecha was constantly fluctuating around its peak. Shang-Chiu gripped the pen in her hand tightly, staring at the graphic display on the monitor in front of her. Her full breasts rose and fell continuously due to her rapid breathing. She was a calm engineer, but at this moment, she could no longer remain calm. She did not understand the specific reason, but she had already guessed that the person inside the little white flower mecha should be Su Lu. This was because only Su Lu, herself, and Bai Yulan knew the biggest flaw of the Purple Sea mecha. Now that Bai Yulan had already been arrested by the Bureau of Proclamation, other than Su Lu, who else would still throw caution to the wind and use Kachi Mountain Range to speed up and bring the Purple Sea mecha into overclocking mode? However, at this time, the Purple Sea mecha on the screen kept its distance from the little white flower mecha in front of it, maintaining the power output of its twin engines near its peak. Occasionally, it would enter overclocking mode for 1 or 2 seconds before automatically lowering its power output. The Purple Sea mecha seemed to rather not catch up to the little white flower mecha than forcefully increase its speed at this time. Could it be that the Academy of Science has found out? Shang-Chiu subconsciously used the tip of her pen to scratch her itchy forehead, completely oblivious to the light blue ink smeared on the side of her eyebrows. She wondered nervously in her heart, if the other had really discovered the problem with the Purple Sea mecha, then what would Su Lu, who was currently inside the white flower mecha, do? How could he really drive that madmanly crazy and force the Purple Sea mecha into overclocking? In the silent polar regions of the moon, in the shadows of the mountain ranges, the white mecha was like a speck of light in the dark night. One moment it was still under a rock, and the next moment, it was using its alloy fingers to claw at a corner of the cliff and climb up. The mecha's movements were not too affected by the damage. Instead, it became more and more practiced, like a monkey leaping swiftly through the mountains. It was impossible for there to be any plants on Kachi Mountain Range. It looked barren, but those heavily weathered cliffs and those places where one could fall at any time were actually all traps. The MX mecha could only turn its body, weighing tens of tons, into a nimble and leaping figure, with the help of both engines and auxiliary wings. In the dark, cold, and bleak shadow of the back of Kachi Mountain Range, the temperature in the air had already dropped to -60 degrees after just a few degrees of separation from the S1 sun. Because there was no water vapor, no frost appeared on the smooth surface of the mecha. However, the alloy surface mixed with weathered sand and stone had some indescribable changes. The outer armor's automatic temperature control system had already been turned off. In the dark cockpit, Su Li's eyes stared intently at the various data parameters provided by the onboard computer, especially the CLS value and ADS value. The mecha's power output had already reached its peak several times, and the adaptive suspension system could no longer hold on for much longer. After all, sprinting at full speed in an environment like Kachi Mountain Range was too taxing on the mecha's body. Huff, huff. Other than the sound of static, the cockpit was silent. Su Li's heavy breathing was exceptionally clear. His control of Little White Flower was becoming smoother and smoother. The mecha control techniques he had painstakingly studied in the past, under the pressure of the Purple Sea mecha behind him, were almost like those 10 stances, becoming instinctive to his body. It was only in this way that he could rely on the simulation system and those combat stances to last until now in the face of Madman Li's terrifying strength. However, the Purple Sea mecha chasing behind him cast a shadow over Su Li's heart. The murderous aura on that mecha was so intimidating that it actually made one feel as if they could not win. Earlier, on the weathered surface at the foot of the mountain, Little White Flower's mecha had kicked backwards in the air, successfully destroying the complex fire control system at the head of the Purple Sea mecha. However, no one had expected that the Purple Sea mecha would actually be able to skillfully control its power system in mid-air. It abruptly moved horizontally, and its mechanical leg bent horizontally to strike Little White Flower's abdomen. It looked like both sides had suffered damage, but Su Lu knew that he had made a big mistake. Compared to Madman Li in the Purple Sea mecha, Su Lu did not have any advantage in mecha piloting. Even with the help of the simulation system, he still could not compare to that young lieutenant colonel who had been immersed in mecha piloting since he was a child. The only area in which he was better than Madman Li was his deep understanding of mecha structures. From the time he had repaired the old M mecha on the ancient Bell, all the way until he had entered the Shell Engineering Division to help with the creation of the MX mecha, he could not be more familiar with every component, every circuit, every chipset, and every position of every transmission rod in a mecha. However, it was precisely because of this habitual thinking that Su Lu had chosen to target the head of the Purple Sea mecha, which had been integrated with most of its information capture system, when the white mecha had taken the risk to strike at the foot of the mountain. However, Madman Li did not seem to care about this at all. He brutally and domineeringly traded injury for injury. It was not until the dust had settled and the palm print had landed on the ground that Su Lu understood that the most terrifying destructive power of the MX mecha was in close combat. The fire control radar was no longer as important as it had been in the past. Meanwhile, in order to destroy the opponent's fire control radar, Little White Flower's mecha had paid the price of damaging its energy transmission system. Rocks slid down the mountain. In the darkness, the white mecha quickly and accurately found another point to leverage on. Its nimble mechanical alloy toes dug into the crevices of the rocks, and with the silent vibration of the engine and the white turbulence of the auxiliary wing jets, the body of the mecha suddenly shot up. It came to a gentle slope and charged upwards. The weathered sand and stones on the slope of the valley were silently disintegrated by the heavy body of the mecha, constantly trembling and undulating. In a situation where the maximum power output was at a disadvantage, the Shell Engineering Division's Little White Flower mecha still possessed a speed that did not lose out to the Purple Sea mecha. On one hand, it relied on Shang Qiutian's dynamic design. On the other hand, it also proved that the Shell Engineering Division was indeed worthy of its reputation as a mecha designer for the federal military. In the field of mecha design, it was still ahead of the Academy of Science. The chase between Little White and the Purple Sea mecha had already lasted for more than 10 minutes. The harsh environment of ultra-low temperature did not seem to affect the performance of the two MX mecha. Their speed was still extremely fast, and the distance between them was still maintained extremely well. Su Lu breathed heavily. He focused on controlling Little White Flower to perform one difficult movement after another. His control became more and more practiced, but his heart became heavier and heavier. He had never imagined that he could control a mecha and truly defeat Madman Li, but he knew some things that Madman Li did not know. He had been waiting for the other to enter overclocking mode, but why was the Purple Sea mecha behind him not willing to forcefully increase its speed and catch up to him? The low-temperature vacuum environment was extremely disadvantageous for the MX's energy consumption. Madman Li in the Purple Sea had been through hundreds of battles. It was impossible for him not to know this. Why was he willing to drag it out like this? The blazing light of the stars shone over the top of the mountain and into the mecha's field of vision, dispelling the cold and darkness. Little White Flower's mecha did a high-speed somersault to the top of the mountain. Then it turned back. What does he want to do? The giant screen showed the image of Little White Flower's mecha leaping to the top of Mount Kaki and then turning back. No one knew how the Federation's electronic surveillance system did it, but the real-time image on the screen had a very high resolution rate. The angle of view was also very beautiful. It was obvious that it was not captured by a high-altitude satellite. The mecha chase that lasted for more than 10 minutes seemed to be a little dull. This was originally a silent battle, but the performance of the two mecha at the foot of the mountain and their exquisite control was enough to excite the audience. In these 10 minutes, in the shadows of Mount Kaki, only the white and purple mecha could be seen moving forward at high speed. This went on for a very long time. The data and computer analysis already showed the people in the command hall and Old Moon Assembly Base that the Academy of Sciences Purple Sea mecha had the upper hand. As for Little White Flower's mecha running up the mountain, everyone was shocked, but they also gradually understood the thoughts of the pilot. Until now, there were still not many people who knew that the pilot in the white mecha was a technical supervisor. They all thought that the pilot must also be an absolutely outstanding ace pilot of the Federation military. Thus, when the image of the white mecha braking and turning around appeared on the screen, everyone felt a strong sense of suspicion. Faced with the overwhelming advantage of the Purple Sea mecha and Li Fang's unstoppable attacks, why would this unknown ace pilot give up the rare balance of speed and stop at the top of the mountain? At this point in the battle, the Federal Academy of Sciences Purple Sea mecha's performance advantage was shown, so the engineers in the command hall were very calm. Shang Qiu, who had a few traces of blue ink at the corner of his eyebrows, looked in that direction, then turned back to look at Lin Yuanhu behind him. Seeing the old man's calm and confident expression, he could not help but snort coldly in his heart. The performance of the Purple Sea mecha depended on its design, and the function model that the design was based on had a parameter error. The MX designed by Nutshell Company was to fix that parameter error, and a part of its performance was sacrificed. No one in the command hall knew this better than Shang Qiu, but the situation was one-sided, and even if she wanted to put on a confident expression, it was extremely difficult. She only knew that Little White Flower was standing at the top of Mount Kaki and turning back. He must be thinking of a way to drag the Purple Sea into overclocking, but she did not know what that guy was going to do. Suddenly, a middle-aged expert beside her touched her shoulder and said hurriedly, "What is Little White Flower doing?" Shang Qiu quickly turned to look at the screen, and her red lips could not help but open slightly. Like everyone in the command hall, she let out an exaggerated gasp. On the giant screen, the white mecha's mechanical arm extended a repair arm from the front, pressing against the heavily damaged abdomen of the mecha, as if some kind of repair work was being done.
Chapter 252. Shang Qiu subconsciously covered her mouth. She knew that Little White Flower MX had some spare parts under its cockpit, but she never would have thought that the pilot would actually choose to repair himself at this time when Little White Flower stood trembling on the peak and the Purple Sea would attack in an instant. Strength was gained through hard work, but confidence was gained through actual combat. At this point in the battle, Su Lu was deeply impressed by Madman Li's unfathomable mecha control ability. At the same time, he also gained a lot of confidence in himself. At this moment, he finally understood that those days when he was tortured beyond recognition by the Level 6 virtual reality test in Area H1 of Lihua University were not in vain. At the beginning of the year, from Tai Ziyuan's words, he already knew how frightening the Level 6 mecha test was. He believed that his control method using the simulation system, if converted to hand speed, should already be close to the standard of an ace pilot in the military. In addition to the high-intensity mecha operation training he had undergone some time ago in the Whitewater underground base on the outskirts of the capital, he believed in his own mecha control ability. Because of this confidence, Su Lu had listened to Bai Yulan's soft instructions before she left and temporarily replaced Zhou Yu's pilot position. Unfortunately, Madman Li was stronger, extraordinarily strong. The youth who entered the Purple Sea mecha was even scarier than his violent and tyrannical self. There were clearly dozens of tons of metal between them, but it could not stop that person from displaying his murderous aura through the ice-cold machine. At this time, Sulu would rather fight the opponent one-on-one with his fists and legs than face him in a mecha. At this moment, he could not help but think of that imperial princess Tai Yuan had mentioned. She had entered the realm of level 6 at the age of 12. Mad Manly had also entered the battlefield at the age of 12. Could it be that this world really had monsters who were born with knowledge? The thing that made Sulu feel the most vigilant, the fact that even his heart that was as hard as a rock was somewhat shaken, was that the purple sea that had always been following behind him didn't enter an overclocking state and forcibly increase its speed to intercept him on the way to Kaki Peak like he had planned. Why did the purple sea, which had been so crazy and violent before, suddenly become so calm and indifferent? His ruthless style coupled with his absolutely calm thinking, and the fact that he was only 16 years old, this type of opponent was truly too frightening. The Lees of Philadelphia, the god of war, the old man, and the uncles, were all the monsters in this universe related to them? When he was thinking about these things, Sulu was not like the ancient swordsman who stood on the peak and waited for the arrival of the Purple Sea mecha. He was a youth with 3 qualities who treated others in a traditional way, but he was not stupid enough to ask for a battle that involved killing, nor would he follow some kind of rigid rules. The little white flower mecha stood steadily on the edge of the platform at the peak. The long-range weapon on its left arm had already been switched on. Without the backup power of the firepower system, it was unable to activate the main cannon. However, the rotating barrel of the Darlin's gun continued to spray out those light dots that represented high-speed projectiles, continuously shooting towards the rugged path below the cliff. It was a pity that the gun barrel on the mecha's left arm did not have a clear clicking sound as an accompaniment. The low-light projectiles were also unable to shatter the weathered lunar mountain and bring more trouble to the figure of the Purple Sea mecha.
The Purple Sea mecha silently and swiftly executed incomparably awesome evasive maneuvers on the cliff, dodging all of the projectiles that Little White Flower had shot out. Sulu had hoped that during the test, his long-range attacks would be able to hit the Purple Sea, or at least force the opponent off the peak. He had only hoped to delay the opponent from reaching the peak, and in reality, he had achieved this. The precise point of impact, as if he could predict the trajectory of the Purple Sea mecha's evasive maneuvers, made even Li Feng, who was controlling the Purple Sea, feel extremely troubled. By the time he neared the peak, another 3 minutes had already passed. In these 3 minutes, Little White Flower's right mechanical arm had not been idle. Instead, it had rapidly carried out self-repair work. In a typical mecha battle, it was simply impossible to give a mechanic any time to repair, but today, in the special environment of the Old Moon Kaki mountain range, the white mecha had managed to do this. This was because the one controlling it was Sulu. In terms of mecha piloting skills, Sulu was a far cry from Mad Manly, but in terms of mecha repair ability, there really were not many people in the Federation who were better than him. The left mechanical arm fired accurately and quickly, while the right mechanical arm calmly carried out its repair work. Between movement and silence, the Little White Flower's mecha towering on the peak of the mountain gave all the spectators who could see this scene a very special feeling. Repairing mecha in the middle of a battle had already left the people in the ground command hall dumbfounded, and right now, the white mecha was clearly carrying out a double-layered operation. The difficulty of this kind of operation was obvious, but Sulu carried it out extremely smoothly. He used the simulation system in conjunction with the control stick and the touch screen to carry out these 2 operations at the same time, so it was not difficult to use them. The ground trembled violently, and the mechanical right arm completed the last critical component replacement. Sulu looked at the digital model descending from the sky in his helmet's field of vision. The heat in his body surged, and he entered the control signal into the mecha. Little White Flower's mecha's joint engines were all on full blast, and it slid diagonally backwards across the surface of the platform at the peak of the mountain, moving straight back 70 meters. There was no sound, but there seemed to be a loud boom. The Purple Sea mecha dodged the last bullet line, shot up into the sky, and fell swiftly and violently. Like a meteorite, it smashed heavily into the position where Little White Flower had been standing just a moment ago. The onboard computer quickly performed a self-check. Sulu knew that most of the kinetic energy input device had been repaired. There could not have been too many backup components in the Nutshell MX design to begin with. It was just an extremely critical component, and it had an extremely small weight. To be able to repair it to this extent, he was already very satisfied. Purple Sea did not charge over like before, but instead stood quietly by the cliff's edge, watching as Little White Flower slowly retracted the repair arm on the right mechanical arm. It seemed that it also felt that the other was very strange, actually choosing to carry out repair work at this time. Inside the Purple Sea mecha, Li Feng did not enter any attack orders. He looked through the field of vision in his helmet at the somewhat tattered white mecha not far away, and remained silent the entire time. Due to the severe damage to the head's information capture system, the fire control radars had all failed. At this time, the onboard computer could not calculate the current situation of the white mecha in time, but just looking at the other like this with visible light, the 16-year-old suddenly felt that it was very interesting. Li Feng's hands left the control stick and touch screen, slowly moving the joints around his wrists, and then he put them back on. He was wearing a specially made control suit, and nothing out of the ordinary could be seen. It tightly wrapped around his burly and powerful body, and on that face that still had the childish expression of adolescence flashed a hint of contemplation that did not match his age. He had joined the army at the age of 12, and had entered the virtual level 6 level in the military's secret test back then. Li Feng knew that in this entire universe, probably only the princess of a faraway empire could be mentioned in the same breath as him. Arrogance, ruthlessness, and the impulse to smash everything in the world came from his bizarre teenage life and his own super strength. To put it bluntly, the greater the strength, the greater the responsibility, and the more intimidating the aura would be. Li Feng was 16 years old, and it was impossible for him to be like his grandfather in the manner of Feiqing, who was as deep as the well, shining with disdain like the eternal stars. However, the bloody battles on the front lines, the countless experiences of escaping from the Empire's mecha ambushes, the wreckage of the pirate ships floating in space, and the bodies of his comrades that flowed like a stream of blood, made this Federation's youngest lieutenant colonel mature at a somewhat abnormal speed. Perhaps, this was the real reason why the war gods sent him to join the army back then. Li Feng, who could survive that kind of environment, was definitely not a madman who only had strength and no brains. Although his personality was a bit crazy, once he entered the battlefield, under the cover of his crazy appearance, he would enter into absolute calmness. That was why, from the start of the battle until now, even when he had such a good pursuit maneuver when he had entered the shadow region of the Khaki mountain range, Li Feng had used his steel-like nerves to forcefully control himself and this Purple Sea mecha beneath him. Nothing could be done to the extreme, and unless it was the most dangerous moment, Madman Li would definitely not allow himself to truly go crazy and use control methods that were beyond his control, such as overclocking. The pilot in the white mecha opposite him was very interesting. Li Feng looked at the opponent in his field of vision who seemed to be facing a great enemy, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. What was interesting was not because this person actually dared to self-repair in the middle of a fierce battle, but because at the foot of the mountain, this pilot was actually able to withstand the continuous attacks of the Purple Sea. Only Li Feng himself knew how frightening that series of ferocious attacks were. His family's legacy combined with this dual-engine high-power mecha, once they were combined, even he himself was a little shocked by the power they produced. He even thought that even the guy with the surname Tian that the brats in the Westwoods military often mentioned, or Commander Zhong personally piloted the mecha, under his previous series of attacks, he was afraid that he would not be able to withstand it. But the pilot in the nutshell had managed to withstand it. Although the blocking was extremely difficult, he had still managed to protect the important parts of the mecha. What made Li Feng even more wary was that he caught a trace of a familiar style from the non-standard tactical movements of the white mecha. It was different from his own style, but it always seemed to be able to predict his movements in advance. Moreover, every time the white mecha made a move, it was so accurate, as if it could perfectly coordinate with his own attacks. This guy is not bad. Li Feng made this evaluation of this pilot in his heart, and because of that trace of wariness in his heart, he secretly raised the other's danger level by another level. However, he had never thought of using this mecha battle test to do anything to this pilot, because he was very confident that the final victor would be him, and the Federal Army just happened to be in need of excellent pilots like the other. Right at this moment, a dark green indicator light in the cockpit of the mecha lit up. Li Feng glanced at it indifferently, and knew that this was the Federal Military Standard Equipment, a short-range encrypted communication system. It was used by the military to carry out small-scale team cooperation under the enemy's electronic attacks. Admit defeat. At this time, on the desolate peak of Old Moon Mountain, the only one who could carry out a short-range encrypted communication between mecha was the white mecha opposite. Although Li Feng did not quite understand, he still spoke first, and with such a matter-of-fact tone, he said coldly, "The mecha is my strong suit, and the piloting is also my better. You don't have a chance." The other end of the communication system was silent for a few seconds, and then a slightly hoarse young voice rang out, "But I still want to tear down your house sign, and you still want to call me uncle."
Chapter 253. Li Feng, who was in the cockpit of the Purple Sea mech, narrowed his eyes when he heard these two words. He knew who the pilot in the white mech in front of him was. Then, he fell silent. Ever since he had found out that he was going to participate in the MX Mecha battle test, Li Feng had never bothered to find out who the nutshell mecha pilot was. Even though he had killed his way from the foot of Mount Kaki all the way to the peak, he still did not pay too much attention to this unknown pilot. Even if an ace pilot from the Empire suddenly appeared in the white mech, he would not be so surprised. When it came to opponents, Madman Li would always just defeat them and step on them. Since that was the case, what difference did it make who the opponent was? However, he would never have thought that the pilot in the white mech would actually be that skinny technical director. Li Feng did not know that Su Lu was now officially part of the federal military. He thought that he was still a civilian second lieutenant. From his perspective, Su Lu had once displayed exceptionally strong close combat abilities in Linyuan. However, fighting was always different from operating a mech. How could the other party be so strong in a mech? Li Feng's eyebrows furrowed. Through the distorted vision of his helmet, he looked at the quiet white mecha in front of him. The shock in his heart dissipated after a long time. He said coldly, "You really do surprise me. Since it's a bet between us, of course I have to defeat you personally. I don't think it's appropriate to let anyone else destroy the house sign of Philadelphia." Su Lu listened to Li Feng's voice from the communicator and said coldly. Waiting for him at the peak, revealing his identity, everything he did was just to provoke the other party. If things had gone according to the previous course of events, Su Lu knew that he was destined to be the loser of the mecha battle. If he wanted to infuriate Li Feng, who was absolutely calm in battle yet was able to display a crazed aura, other than that bet and the fact that he was in a mecha, he could not think of any other way. Li Feng frowned. He looked at the white mech in his field of vision and suddenly said, "You really surprised me. But congratulations, you've successfully provoked my desire to kill you." "That's my wish," Su Lu thought silently in his heart. Then, he heard Madman Li's cold voice from the communicator. "I don't know why you brought the mech to the peak, but I can tell you this. Before coming to the base, I've already looked at the surface features of the polar regions of Old Moon. On this peak, you have no way out. On this point, I've taken advantage of you." The successor of the Lees of Philadelphia had a special status in the federal military. Before coming to Old Moon, naturally, there were military staff members who had drawn up the terrain features of the battleground for Mad Manly. Su-Lo heard Mad Manly admit it himself and felt a little complicated. Although this young genius lieutenant colonel was violent and arrogant, in a direct battle, he did not lose his integrity. Su-Lo suddenly thought of his real intention of dragging the other into the overclocking battle. After a moment of silence, he stopped thinking about this problem and said, "Work hard. Actually, I'm only a few years older than you. I don't want to be your uncle." After saying this sentence full of mockery, Su-Lo took 2 deep breaths, opened a safety valve beside the control stick, and lightly pressed the start button. Hearing the voice from the communicator, Mad Manly's delicate features flashed with a trace of darkness. Su-Li's voice was very calm, but it was this calmness that made Mad Manly feel a trace of humiliation. "You want to tear down the Lee family of Philadelphia? You want to humiliate me? You actually want to participate in the mecha battle personally?" Su-Li's choice surprised him, but he also felt that it was a challenge.
His delicate features gradually calmed down, but a cold murderous intent had already risen up like a burning fire. It followed his body and fingers, and transmitted to the heavy and huge purple sea mecha. The super-close encrypted conversation was not captured by satellites or electronic surveillance networks. Whether it was in the Old Moon Base's viewing room or in the S1 Capital's command hall, there was no third person who could hear the conversation between Su-Lo and Mad Manly. The people watched the huge widescreen screen. On the screen, the purple sea mecha and the little white flower mecha stood at the peak of Cocky Peak, at the border between light and shadow. No one dared to blink. They did not know what kind of surprise the 2 powerful pilots inside these 2 latest MX mecha would bring them in the next moment. However, at this time, the people were only puzzled. After the purple sea mecha caught up to the peak, it did not immediately launch a wild attack like before. That little white flower mecha also did not escape in a wretched and delicate manner. The 2 mecha, each 7 meters tall, just stood silently on the peak, like 2 divine statues overlooking the mortal world. "What are they doing? Don't tell me they've run out of energy," asked an official in the command hall with a frown. The military bigwigs beside him ignored this official because they knew very well that the self-contained energy of the MX mecha was enough to support this new mecha for several hours of continuous battle. However, they did not mock this official, because looking at the 2 silent mecha on the screen, these military bigwigs also did not know what was going on. According to the battle style of the old war god, how could that brat Mad Manly be so stupid as to pay attention to elegance in battle? Director Lin Yuanhu, who had been sitting quietly on the stage, suddenly leaned forward and then sat up straight. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the 2 silent mecha on the screen. He could vaguely guess what was going to happen next. He was not worried at all because he believed in the performance of the purple sea mecha and Lieutenant Colonel Li Feng's absolute strength. However, why did he feel a chill in his chest? Could it be that as he got older, he could no longer withstand stimulation? What's going on? On the left side of the command hall, the experts from the Nutshell Engineering Department stared blankly at the data and asked with some unease. Perhaps these 2 pilots sympathized with each other and could not help themselves? Shang Qiu said with a smile as she took a tissue from a staff member beside her and wiped the blue ink from the corner of her eyes. Seeing this scene, her heart finally relaxed a little. Although she did not know what had happened on the distant Cocky Peak of the Old Moon, it was clear that neither Su-Lo nor Mad Manly were willing to wait any longer. What happened? The crowd in the command hall was all discussing what was happening on the screen, but this voice was especially panicked and loud. The 1st Military Academy's Mobility Department director on the stage stood up abruptly again. He was the first to notice the abnormal situation of the 2 mecha on the peak. He pointed at the screen and shouted loudly at the engineering staff below. On the wide screen, although the temperature on the peak of Cocky Peak was high, because of the weathered rocks and white light, it appeared incomparably cold and desolate. The little white flower mecha and the purple sea mecha exhaled several extremely fine streams of air almost at the same time. Those milky white streams of air shot out quickly, just like the old-fashioned steam locomotives in museums, but also like two leaky old-fashioned boilers. The people watching this scene could not hear the sound on the peak of Cocky Peak, but they seemed to be able to hear the sizzling sound coming from beside their ears. That was the sound of the high-speed streams of air. The fine white streams of air stopped as soon as they shot out. The two mecha on the peak still stood quietly, but then a metal component fell off from the white mecha's mechanical arm and smashed heavily into the weathered rocks on the peak, stirring up a cloud of dust. Another object fell heavily, and the dust rose again. At the same time, the purple sea mecha not far away also began to shed its components. Those components also fell to the ground, shaking up the dust. The dust filled the peak and gradually covered the figures of the two mecha. Then, it gradually calmed down, revealing their true appearance. It was still the two MX mecha, one purple and one white. Around the mechanical legs of the mecha were countless pieces of equipment of various sizes scattered. It was like a reptile shedding its skin, or like a branch full of fruit, unwilling to bear the heavy weight anymore. The branch broke, and the fruit fell. These comparisons were actually not appropriate. These two MX mecha were actually like two humans who had suddenly entered the height of summer from the dead of winter, shedding all of the thick and heavy cotton jackets on their bodies. Mecha number 2, long-range weapon system automatically detached. Auxiliary balancer ejected. Alloy plate caterpillar detached. Hidden repair arm detached. Block 41 hidden door opened, firmware detached. Mecha number 1, weapon system confirmed to have failed and detached. Infrared auxiliary capture system detached. Alloy plate caterpillar detached. As the two MX mecha on the screen began to shed their components, the electronically synthesized voice in the command hall once again sounded. The cold electronically synthesized female voice fell into the ears of the people in the hall, but it stirred up endless shock. However, these shocks were all very well suppressed in the hearts of the people. They silently and nervously watched everything on the screen. Only now did they know that those thin white streams of air that had danced wildly like silver snakes in the vacuum earlier were the connection devices used to separate these components from the mecha body. However, other than the expert engineers from the Nutshell Engineering Department and the Federal Academy of Science, many of the other important figures watching the battle did not understand why the two MX mecha on the mountain peak would do such a thing at this time. Mecha number 1, dual engines on full power, joint micro-engine power synthesis, auxiliary flying wing engine on full power, power breaking the upper limit, entering the 15% range. Mecha number 2, dual engines on full power, joint micro-engine power synthesis, attention please, officially entering overclocking mode. Attention please, officially entering overclocking mode. The people in the command hall were first silent, and then they immediately began to silently bustle about. The technicians and experts in the three areas at the front of the hall began to record data. The people watching the battle did not need to personally deal with this situation, but under the commentary of the technicians at the side, they also fell into a tense silence. On the screen, the red beam of light that represented the mecha's power output had been continuously rising, and had long broken through the line that represented safety. The technicians and experts stared nervously at the part of the system they were responsible for, and no one on the viewing platform was talking. This was because everyone knew the horrors of overclocking mode, and knew that the time to truly test the new MX mecha had arrived. Removing all long-range redundant devices, integrating all the power of the mecha's joint microengine, discarding the heavy firepower system, and forcibly adjusting the position of the electronic jets to provide power beyond the limits of the mecha, this was overclocking mode. This was the absolute state for close combat in the design concept of the new mecha, but it was also the most dangerous state. If this was on a real battlefield, a combat mecha in overclocking mode was basically the same as fighting to survive. This was because at this time, the mecha no longer had a complete life support system and long-range capabilities. In a situation where there was no strong backup, even if the opponent was defeated, the only thing left for this mecha in the end was the possibility of self-destruction. The two MX mecha participating in the test on the summit of Kaki Peak had simultaneously detached themselves from those life-saving components and entered an overclocked combat state at almost the same time. This was putting themselves in a death zone where they could not lose, where they could not retreat. This was not the planned arrangement of the battle test, and the risk was extremely high. What reason had prompted those two pilots to make such a decision? Could it be because of the hypocritical silence earlier? On the viewing platform, Lin Yuanhu slowly stood up and stared at the mecha images on the giant screen, silent for a long time. Below the viewing platform, the people in the Nutshell Engineering Department were busy tracking Little White Flower's data, ensuring that the overclocking power was within the acceptable range of the engine material. No one noticed that Shang Qiu had already left her workstation. She walked to the bottom of the screen and looked up, clenching her hands tightly as she counted silently in her heart. 175,174. On the summit, Little White Flower's mecha suddenly trembled. It only trembled a little before it stuck close to the weathered rock surface of the platform and swept towards the Purple Sea mecha. If it was said that the high speed of the 2MX mecha in running mode with the help of the auxiliary flying wings had already shocked everyone in the command hall, then the mecha's movements in overclocking mode right now were so fast that it was almost a blur. The surrounding dust and smoke kicked up by the heavy mecha's footsteps could not keep up with the movements of that white shadow at all. The Purple Sea mecha's speed was faster than Little White Flower's, and its movements were more precise and direct. Its heavy mechanical legs were as nimble as air. The spherical joints opened slightly, and the body of the mecha made a strange twist, causing the alloy-toothed blade in front of the white mecha's mechanical arm to graze the white mecha's right arm. The Purple Sea mecha's right shoulder trembled, and the three-edged alloy blade at the front of the mechanical arm stabbed viciously into the white mecha's side ribs. There was no strong wind at the summit, but a great cloud of dust and smoke covered the sky. The two newest MX mecha were like two fearless warriors in the midst of the dust and smoke, neither retreating or escaping. The anti-skid mechanical legs gripped the ground tightly as they performed extremely difficult attacks and chops. In less than 20 seconds, who knew how many alloy fists had smashed heavily into each other's bodies? The powerful power provided by the twin engines was now completely converted into speed and close-range combat strength under overclocking mode. That was a destructive force. The 80 cm alloy tri-edged blade drew a streak of faint purple light across the summit and stabbed viciously into the white mecha's body. Then it was pulled out, leaving behind several trails of liquid, and the impact knocked over several pieces of armor connected to the mecha's body. In overclocking mode, the Purple Sea mecha was more like a space chariot driven by a god. Its power was unstoppable, its power unmatched. Su Li did not have the time to wipe away the fresh blood at the corner of his lips. Narrowing his eyes, he stared at the data display on his helmet, using all his strength to move the power in his body and control the simulation system to perform mecha movements one after another that even he himself could not imagine, dodging the terrifying attacks of the Purple Sea mecha. At the same time, he counted silently in his heart, 159,158. Chapter 254. The battle at the peak was completely different from the battle at the foot of the mountain, as well as the running between the mountains. Both the Purple Sea mecha and Little White Flower no longer made any movements of flying. Instead, they clung to the ground with their mechanical legs, relying entirely on the movements of the mecha's upper body to fight. The honest here naturally meant that they had slowed down their speed by many times before they could sense it. In reality, the two MX mecha were like willow tree monsters, rooted deeply in the soil, not a trace of disorder in the slightest. Every step they took seemed so solid, but the movements of the upper half of the mecha were like willow branches dancing wildly in the wind, fast, dangerous, and terrifyingly precise. This scene gave the spectators the illusion that the mechanical legs of the 2MX mecha in overclocking did not seem to move at all. Instead, it was only the ground beneath the mecha that moved as the godlike purple sea mecha twisted its body, and the sharp tri-edged armor-piercing thorn slid along the surface of Little White Flower's already broken alloy mecha. The huge tri-edged thorn, nearly 1 meter long, was like a firework stick in the hands of a child. The tip of the thorn brought out a shocking spark. In the midst of the silent battle, the sawtooth blade on the right mechanical arm of the white mech silently sliced across from under the arm, leaving a shallow cut on the wrist of the purple sea mech, but at least it stopped the purple sea mech from delivering a fatal stab. The loud roar of the twin engines did not have air as a medium to announce its power, but it caused the body of the mecha to tremble. Under the effect of the peak power, the purple sea mecha retracted its mechanical leg, and like a gust of wind, it forced its way into the midsection of Little White Flower's mecha, its shoulder slamming into the midsection of the cockpit. For a moment, broken pieces of the shock-absorbing armor flew everywhere. A chilling distortion slowly appeared, and the white mecha slumped, about to fall 147. Su-le ignored the bloodstains on his chest, silently counting down in his heart. The weight of high speed was already a heavy enough burden for a pilot. After entering overclocking mode, Little White Flower's mecha could no longer provide a complete shock-absorbing and life support system like before when it faced the violent attack of the purple sea head-on. The tremendous impact caused his iron-like body to feel sore and painful, as if it was about to fall apart. Su-le didn't know how many mouthfuls of blood he had spat out. His face was a little pale as he stared at the holographic screen in his helmet. His hands moved quickly, and the joysticks made cracking sounds as if they were about to break. Every inch of his skin was burning as he sent instructions to the simulation system. Controlling Little White Flower to block Purple Sea's fierce thrust, but it was unable to block Purple Sea's powerful strike. As the surface of the mech changed shape, Su-le's vision turned black for a moment from the tremendous force. From the warning data of the onboard computer, he knew that Little White Flower had lost its balance. With a muffled grunt, Su-le's body, which was wrapped in the simulation system, began to tremble rapidly. Countless complex commands were transmitted to every component of the mecha. The thick and heavy mechanical legs began to tremble and slide. They began to move in a semi-closed arc around a certain fixed point. The high-speed hydraulic pipelines and transmission devices in the armor pressed, stretched, and returned to their original positions at a speed that could not be seen with the naked eye. During this process, the terrifying impact of the Purple Sea's mecha was gradually dispelled. Little White Flower's mecha looked like it was on the brink of death, but in the end, it stood proudly at the end of the 2 deep trenches. Can't fall. Su-le flicked the 5 fingers of his right hand. Cooperating with the simulation system, he controlled Little White Flower's mecha to stick close to the platform on the peak and charge towards the Purple Sea once more. After entering overclocking mode, both Su-le and Mad Manly no longer used the fierce leaping attack moves they had done at the foot of the mountain. Instead, with great tacit understanding, they had their mecha cling tightly to the weathered rocks on the peak as they advanced. Their horizontal movement speed increased slightly, but neither attempted to attack from the air. Overclocking battle was an extremely risky battle mode. From the very beginning, Su-le had acted on instinct and operated his mecha according to the 10 stances Uncle Feng Yu had taught him. He was not willing to let Little White Flower leave the ground for even a microsecond. Those 10 mysterious and strange stances were all powerful body techniques that allowed one to stand tall on the ground and remain as still as a pine tree. He did not quite understand why the Purple Sea's mecha would also choose this type of battle mode. Could it be that Uncle Feng was really related to the Lees of Philadelphia in some way? Su-Lu could vaguely grasp the Purple Sea's mecha's battle style and attack patterns. Linking it to that night in Linyuan, he even had a feeling that the 10 stances Uncle Feng had taught him seemed to be some kind of secret technique to counter the Lees of Philadelphia. However, Madman Lee was still Madman Lee after all. It was no wonder he was known as the invincible fighter in the military. It was no wonder he was the super strong fighter who had continuously hunted down the Empire's Royal Mecha Battalion for more than 3 years. Even if Su-Lu used the simulation system to control his mecha, which was equivalent to the hand speed of a military ace pilot, and even if he could vaguely guess the attack rhythm and direction of the Purple Sea's mecha, he could not find any chance to retaliate in front of the purple torrent that filled the peak of the mountain. Previously, at the foot of the mountain, the Purple Sea's mecha had displayed mobility and crazy attack ability in Madman Lee's hands had already made Su-Lu feel that it was difficult to withstand. However, after entering overclocking mode, the Purple Sea's mecha became even more terrifying in close combat. Firstly, the super performance of the Purple Sea after overclocking was fully displayed. Secondly, Li Feng, who was controlling the Purple Sea, seemed to really be a little crazy. In the vision of Su Li's helmet, on the holographic screen of the Old Moon base and the ground command hall, everyone seemed to vaguely see a roaring purple spotted tiger. It was currently charging towards the platform on the peak of the Khaki Peak on the moon's polar region, towards the white mecha that refused to admit defeat no matter what. It was launching its final bite. The white mecha flashed and dodged at high speed. Time and time again, in contact, collision, sword light, and shadow of punches, the white mecha was knocked back and injured. Inside the mecha, Su-Lu kept staring with his pair of small eyes, silently counting down in his heart, 132,131. At this moment, Su-Lu, who was inside the little white flower mecha, was not squinting his eyes like before. Instead, he was staring with wide eyes at the Purple Sea mecha in his vision. In the Purple Sea, Li Feng, on the other hand, was skillfully operating the mecha, launching wave after wave of powerful attacks. At the same time, he was squinting his eyes to size up the white mecha that was in a terrible state. Its performance had dropped drastically, but it still refused to admit defeat. For this young genius pilot from the Federation, mecha battles had long become a part of his life. It was an exciting factor in his blood. This kind of intense battle should not have made him enter such a violent and wild state. However, that despicable person in the white mecha unexpectedly made him develop such a strong desire to battle. Li Feng admitted that Su-Lu had surprised him. Not only did Su-Lu personally operate the mecha to battle with him, but also the standard that Su-Lu had displayed in this battle. This was already close to the standard of an ace pilot in the army. Moreover, he knew that Su-Lu was the technician who had developed the Nutshell MX, so in terms of operating the new MX, he had a great advantage. However, he still did not think that Su-Lu would be able to defeat him. This was a kind of pride and confidence that was deeply rooted in his bones. The Purple Sea's excellent maneuverability perfectly displayed the standard of his mecha operation. The Purple Sea's current ferocious attacks were like a raging river. In fact, he could do it with his eyes closed. When Li Feng was still a baby and had just opened his eyes, that grandfather of his had carried him into the mecha. Not long after he had learned how to walk, his grandfather had started to let him try to climb the ladder beside the tall mecha. Other than his grandfather, the first word that Li Feng had learned was mecha. Before he had learned how to drive a car, he had already learned how to operate a mecha. Before he had time to like girls, such as Yuzi, he had already fallen in love with the feeling of operating a mecha. When all the youths in the Federation were still looking at the teaching screens and imagining the mecha levels in online games, the 12-year-old Li Feng had already been sent to the front lines of the West Woods by his grandfather. He had passed the unprecedented military test and obtained his first real military mecha. Then, he had begun to operate the M52 on the mineral planets, on the pirate ships. He had learned how to slaughter, and had gotten used to smashing the enemy's mecha into a pile of scrap metal, in the short 16 years of Madman Li's life, he had always been closely associated with the term mecha, never separating from it. Sometimes, he even felt that every time he stayed in the stuffy and quiet cockpit, he was his true self. Invincible in the military, Madman Li, these were all adjectives he had gotten from operating a mecha. This was because the moment he entered a mecha, he would be even wilder and more violent than usual. This was because he was even stronger in a mecha. Thus, Li Feng could not understand why Su Lu had been able to hold on for so long. Why did he not admit defeat even though he knew that defeat was certain and could only be worse? Thinking of that bet, and the white mecha's persistence at this moment, Madman Li's eyes narrowed even more. A hint of anger flashed through his reddish eyes. The purple sea mecha attacked fiercely once again, ravaging the little white flower over and over again. There was no such thing as mutual appreciation. The pale-faced Su Lu stared with wide eyes amidst the intense tremors. He stared at that purple sea which was like a mad tiger, controlling his mecha to avoid those fatal points of attack as he mumbled softly to himself, "Fuck you, fuck you." His voice was so gentle, so calm that even he himself felt that he was still calm. He did not feel the intimidating power and aura displayed by the purple sea mecha before him. However, his rationality told him that whether it was in terms of mecha operation accuracy, battle experience, or any of the qualities and abilities required to operate a mecha, Li Feng was far above him in all aspects. If this had not been a secret military test match, Su Lu knew that Madman Li would definitely not mind killing him after defeating him. Thus, there was no such thing as mutual appreciation. He only stared coldly, wanting to see how the other would die. The countdown in his heart had already reached 1,117 seconds. 1 minute had passed, so there were still more than 2 minutes left. Su Lu did not know if he could hold on for more than 2 minutes. He did not know if the little white flower's mecha would explode prematurely. After entering overclocking, the battle was even more one-sided. The white mecha was in an extremely wretched state, looking like it could explode at any moment. However, Su Lu had no intention of surrendering. He only made each of his operations more precise, each of his dodges faster, each of his attacks fiercer. On the quiet platform of Cocky Peak, the purple sea mech was like an invincible god, while the white mech was like a trembling little white flower. Occasionally, it would be blown away by the wind or crushed by the giant's feet. There were several parts of the mech's body that were bent out of shape. Liquid leaked out, and the central control system was damaged. It could collapse at any moment. But it did not collapse. The people in the ground command hall watched the images on the screen in silence. The neutral military mechanics and engineers watched this scene quietly. A sense of respect for the successor of the military god grew in their hearts, as well as respect for the nutshell mecha operator. On the other hand, the staff in the nutshell area were clenching their fists nervously. Looking at the tragic sight of the little white flower on the screen, all of them had the urge to admit defeat. Shang Qiu's eyes had already turned into the moon's. She stared blankly at the screen. She knew that the little white flower's mecha was not willing to admit defeat. It was persevering, wanting to hold on until that moment arrived. But the problem was, looking at the data being fed back at this moment, the little white flower's mecha would not be able to hold on until that moment. It would be in danger of exploding. As the technical supervisor of the Nutshell Engineering Department, she did not have the authority to stop this test. But subtly, she suddenly really hoped that Su Lu would admit defeat, because this way, at least he would be able to preserve his own life. There was nervousness, there was respect, and naturally there were other emotions as well. Not everyone would cast a respectful gaze towards a persevering loser. The professors and experts from the Federal Academy of Science were already smiling calmly and confidently as they watched the screen at the top of Cocky Peak. From their perspective, the standards of the Federation's new MX mecha would definitely be the glory that belonged to them. On the viewing platform, Dean Lin Yuanhu no longer leaned forward. He stroked the white hair at the corner of his forehead and sat back down in his chair. Turning his head, he whispered a few words to the National Security Advisor beside him. There were not many people in the old moon base who had the authority to watch this mecha test battle, but there were still more than 100 people. They were all soldiers of the Federation, so naturally, they would stand on the side of the heir of the military god who was operating the Purple Sea mecha. Just like the people from the Academy of Science in the Ground Command Hall, they too had relaxed smiles on their faces. It was just that the people in the military base were more direct in their reactions. Some of them began to cheer, while others even began to count. These military officers thought back to the bet that the technical supervisor of Nutshell had made with Lieutenant Colonel Li Feng 2 days ago. They thought back to the young man's disrespect towards the military god of Philadelphia. Right now, watching the Purple Sea mecha tormenting the little white flower in a frenzy, their emotions were stirred to the extreme. 1, 2, 3. They were counting. How many more seconds would it take for the Purple Sea mecha to defeat that white mecha? They were even wondering if they should immediately go and drag the technical supervisor of Nutshell out so that he could fulfill his end of the bet and kneel down before the Lees of Philadelphia.